Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Today is February 11th, 2024, and we are here to talk about the world. That means current events, foreign policy, economics, history, and so on. Movies probably, and video games. What's going on? Let us know in World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Hello.
Yo.
Hey.
How are you, sir? Oh. Nice timing. Well, we can always help you complain. I have lots of things that people have been complaining about. So if you need any ideas, we got a big full list. But my day has been very emotional because we did the last raid from our WoW guild for the 25-person organized raids we've been doing every weekend.
The last one.
Yeah, 4.5 years of doing weekends. And I would take maybe, I don't know, like 4 weeks off a year where I didn't do that every weekend. So it was a huge part of my routine in my life, and a lot of people who I had been sharing that time with for all this time, which is a lot. But the game is kind of at a point in its life cycle now where there isn't another major raid tier that's coming out for that expansion, and there's a different expansion coming out, and it has a lot of changes that not everyone agreed with at the time, and then also some people just kind of want more of their free time back after playing for 4.5 years continuously.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It feels like a big success in the sense of remaining a coherent and consistent group that endured for that long, because a lot of guilds maybe last for one of the 3 expansions, and we saw all the stuff in all 3, which is pretty sick. So yeah, learning lots of stuff about leadership and groups of people and stuff has been really interesting. Just seeing how certain people are really eager for power and some people are very power averse. Like they want to make sure they're outside of those situations. So I can
sympathize.
Yeah. So in a sense, I feel like humans are a really good social group animal where certain people have certain tendencies and other people have opposing tendencies that makes them complementary to each other. So one offsets the other because some people really want to be in the spotlight. They want to be making the decisions. They want to have that pressure and also that glory. And then some people prefer to just kind of let those moves be made and to observe what's happening and maybe to weigh in, but they don't really want to be in the spotlight. So we've had some people in the guild who almost never use their microphone. Like they pretty much always choose to use text because it doesn't take up as much space. So that's the kind of person who's more quiet in their energy and presence and how much space they take up. And then some people are more vocal. And it's interesting to see the full range of that and just how different groups and different personality types either do get along or don't. And the thing that's insane, and this is a huge credit to people who play WoW or any major group MMO, sharing one voice channel with 25 to 40 people is a feat. It's insane that we can even accomplish anything. That's one of the things that I know people do say dumb shit a lot of the time, but the fact that you can actually get people to coordinate and do stuff is a huge part of why we're the ones who wield the paintbrush on the world now, because we have been able to figure out how to do some stuff in fairly large groups and agree that this is good for all of us. So we're all going to do different jobs to complement each other to figure out how to solve this problem. So WoW allows you to do that, and that's part of why it feels so rewarding to play the game with people. Like on an individual level, the skill expression of a WoW character is not quite the same as like an RTS pro or like a Dota pro or something, a Counter-Strike pro where it's like super precise. It feels like it's maybe slightly easier on the individual player skill, but to get everyone to coordinate together just makes a whole different type of skill expression, which is how to coordinate with others and make sure that you're in your proper place and they're in their proper place and you're communicating with each other as stuff changes. So yeah, super huge respect for MMO players as well, just because the social skills are so hard.
Yeah, social institutions are institutions too.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of take on a life of their own after a while. But like all institutions, they kind of run their course. And they do kind of have an expiration date.
Yeah. It's interesting too to see like the different periods of power in the guild, like just for different elements. Like maybe it's a period of like really good raider satisfaction. Like I would consider that a strong point in our guild history where people are really happy and enjoying the content and getting along. Like those were wins. But then there were also periods where we had higher performing players and more of a culture of pushing our results and really doing well on fights and playing your class well. Like that kind of battle strictness. At certain periods we had more players who were like that, and certain periods we had less players who were like that. Like I can think of a couple raid tiers where we were top 50 guilds on our server, and we're on a huge server, like in what's called Sunwell. Creation was very strong. We got our Muru kill quite early, relative to other guilds that you would say are like more dad guilds, more casual. They're not super sweaty, no life for gamers who know the game in and out and they try to play perfectly. It's like a lot of people who have families and jobs and stuff like that, but also some sweaty players. So just seeing how we had those differences in performance and how you can't really be mad at the current performance of the guild just because it's due to so many different factors. You can try to stimulate improvement from the players by like starting conversations about, hey, what are you wanting to work on with your play? Can we help you improve your gear or improve the spells that you're casting just to maximize your character's effectiveness? It feels like there are a lot of parallels with how companies work and how tribe structure works in making sure that everyone is pulling enough weight to justify them being there. Because with raiding, you're basically feeding out people loot, like whatever you win from defeating these bosses, you have to share that out between the people, and that kind of keeps them happy. Same thing if you're in a tribe. If you're a creature, you need to eat food to live, which is some amount of the tribe's resources. So if you're eating their food, what are you bringing to the table? You have to basically figure out what kind of thing you can contribute based on your skill set and based on your personality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, big shout out to the raiders who never talk. That's like perfect calm discipline. You never interrupt your superior if you never talk. You've perfected that stat.
I can do that. I think that might be in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, you're a observer. I haven't been in as many group situations with you because most of the time we're in a small group of people where everyone knows each other. So you do feel comfortable taking up a lot of space when it's a more smaller scale conversation.
Yeah. I will drone on too much in such cases, but yeah, when it's a larger crowd or mixed company, I'm pretty much invisible. I remember in, it must have been middle school, I guess. I was, at the start of the year, we all had assigned seats, and so I sat behind, just some girl. And then a couple weeks into class, she turns around one day and does a double take and says, how long have you been sitting there? Since the start of class? And she says, I didn't notice you. And I was like, all right. Just never said anything. So nobody ever really noticed I was there.
Agent Smith, Stealth 100. He's invisible.
Not an uncommon occurrence.
It's all about timing, says chat. So,
hang on.
He's taking a second to get the door. I'm kind of feeling like trying some random Vanguard could be funny while we're just chilling. Chat, welcome. As you notice on screen, instead of laddering StarCraft, I'm going to be playing some Stormgate while we do world discussion. It's a new video game in beta. We can stream it until tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. And then after that, they'll sue the shit out of us. So we have to get in the laps that we can. But this game is really cool. Have you heard of this, Agent Smith?
Yes.
Cool.
Wait, you're talking about the RTS, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. There's the Vanguard, which is basically humans and kind of smooth rounded mechs and stuff. And then you've got the Infernals, which is like demon host. And then the third faction is yet to be announced. There are a lot of theories about what it might be. Some people have said anime cat girls. Other people have said night elves. Other people have said it could be just straight up Protoss is still back. Who knows?
Well, a lot of different directions they could go, I guess.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the story is about, and without knowing that, I couldn't really guess.
Yeah, so the Infernals, I think they're the same as a lot of the hell lore of, say, the Doom universe, where they're just pursuing energy and resource and stuff. They just want more stuff. They consume worlds. So
Gotcha. Demon Halliburton.
yeah, well, the thing about the Infernals is they will like integrate a species from a world into the host, and then they're just permanently part of that team, and they spawn more of them. So I think each of these different creatures, they're not of the same like demon planet or whatever. They're from different planets. But if it's like deemed to be a worthy asset to the infernal host, then they'll, I guess, get their DNA and then make a bunch of them. So it's Zerg-like in that sense.
Huh.
Yeah. Vanguard seem pretty copy pasta, just generic future humans. It looks more clean cut and smooth than the Terran.
Mm-hmm.
Terran looked more rugged and more kind of wide shapes. These are a lot more smooth shapes. Terran has boxy, and it's like the battle cruiser is a series of rectangles. The tank is a series of rectangles. The Thor is as well, and these ones are more rounded with the aesthetic. But it looks pretty cool. I have no idea what the story is going to be, but demons are probably attacking humans. Seems pretty expected, given their motivations.
Sucks to be human. Everything's after you.
Yeah, but you're also kind of an asshole too in the process.
True. We do have our moments.
We have our sins. Yeah. So I've been reading through the American Nations still. I don't really take a ton of time to read to myself. It'll be like 15 to 20 minute sessions. So I do read, but I don't like read for long periods of time just with my life flow. But I'm currently through the kind of section where the different regions are communicating with each other about what they want to do in terms of rebelling against Britain. Do they want to like hard on boycott everything, like just say we're not going to get any of your goods because you're doing all this stuff to us and we have no representation? There were also some more moderate kind of loyalist types who were thinking, well, what if we just had representation in England? We could ask the king to have an American parliament where we were represented there too. So there were a bunch of different takes from people, but obviously a lot of the big names we think of as founding fathers, they were the more aggressively, no, fuck them, like we should just have our own country. Like George Washington, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, all those people are referenced by names as like very well-to-do, powerful people in their respective region. Like Washington, I think, was from Virginia. I think Jefferson was Maryland or something. It's in here somewhere, but yeah, it's really cool to see that lead up of talking with the different regions, and also how the communication between the regions was so difficult because their economies were based on really different stuff, and they didn't really have much cultural overlap either. Like between the deep south and the pilgrims in the north, like that's very different groups of people with very different societies. Yeah,
that was one of the striking things that stuck out to me in the book. Yeah, the whole genesis of modern American culture kind of spins out of that, and he kind of gets into that later in the book. So somewhat mixed effect. Some of the arguments later in the book don't hold up as well, but you can definitely see how the kinds of institutions that were built in the different regions, or not built, as the case may be, influence their trajectory. New England was the more literate society, invested in religion, equality, representative governance, and they built institutions that reflected those values. Educational institutions like public schools and universities, law schools, and they put a premium on ensuring that their people were literate, beyond not only just to read the Bible, although that was the main motivation, but having been taught to read for that reason, they could also read, other stuff. And so that resulted in a more artistically inclined, educated class of people that were invested in ideas. Whereas in the South, it was very different. Of course, it was not a society that was dedicated or committed to equality. It was more of a plantation, slave-based economy. And the social norms and institutions that were built in that region kind of reflected that. They were institutions designed to keep the peace, ensure that the power elite were not challenged by people who were dispossessed, and that were centered around their ability to continue to maintain their quality of life. And while the elites in the South could be very educated and enlightened, we have examples like Thomas Jefferson in that vein, that was purely at their discretion. They didn't have to do that. And even people like Jefferson really struggled with the disparity between their liberal values and the nature of the very illiberal society that they were living in the South. So just markedly different societies, as you say. And you can still see that kind of to this day. The broader South has a political culture that is more, as they would say, they are more respectful of authority. A more cynical creature would say that they're more authoritarian and autocratic. But that's a whole debate unto itself. But you can see in the North that they don't have that sort of approach to politics. It's more about civil society and groups of people sort of banding together to pursue some kind of common interest, be that in the form of, say, what were they, Congregationalist churches, sort of in the 17th and 18th century. Later on, it was sort of these Enlightenment, utopian groups that kind of formed, like the Oneida group in Western New York. And later on, it was unions. And then more recently, it's, a whole myriad of socially oriented special interest groups. Those tend to be more predominant in places like the Northeast and parts of the country that were either settled or influenced culturally and politically by the Northeasterners. If you look at a place like Texas or some of the other more southern-oriented cultural areas of the United States, it's definitely more of like an old boys network in terms of the political culture. It's more just about who's in power, who they know, and what they want. And everything that they kind of do and try to justify spins out from that, is derived from that. Yeah, the mid-Atlantic states are kind of interesting too. They also have their own unique culture. It's more sort of the pacifist Quakerism mixed with the self-sufficiency and isolation of the Germans, isolationism of the Germans that settled there. So they tend to be sort of the Mid-East, sort of the mid-Atlantic region has more of an insular tradition. Its culture is more inward-looking and more about small government, and more about being left alone. So that you can also see that, very predominantly in American politics and culture. And that's very much sort of their influence, their legacy.
Yeah, from what I could tell in the section about the Germans is they kind of just wanted to farm in areas that were nice and far away from stuff and not be involved in any other people's business.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a valid lifestyle to pursue.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense, especially given where they were coming from. Most of them came over from Germany in the 1600s. And if you know anything about Germany in the 1600s, it was pretty rough. The 30 Years' War killed off something like a third of Germany's population. So it was a pretty rough-hewn, war-torn era for much of Europe, but especially Germany. And a lot of the people that left Germany were really looking for something quieter. Kind of saying something that they came to a place as sort of hectic and untamed as the American frontier, because they saw it as less violent than what was going on in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just how bad things were at the time.
Was also reading that there was I think it was the Scots-Irish that went to Appalachia or whatever, that
Yeah.
they would take whatever the opposing position was of whoever was over the hill from them, just to spite them, generally. So if the part over there of the colonies was loyalist, then they would just be pro-revolutionary just because to fuck them, basically, and then vice versa.
Mm.
If they're pro-revolutionary, they're like, well, we're going to be loyalists for the king, fuck you. Okay.
Yeah, very, very combative people.
Mm-hmm.
Was my takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I don't know if you've gotten to it yet, but another one of the points he makes is that even within the Scots-Irish community, there was sort of a disparity in power, because certain clans and families would have better land and more power within their communities, and then there would sort of be more marginalized families on the outside looking in, and a lot of the rivalries kind of centered around that particular cleavage.
Mm.
And there was also what to me was a very familiar divide between the inland Scots-Irish peoples and the coastal elite, as they were seen. That also was a major point of cleavage, politically speaking, between them. Because the Scots-Irish just hated everybody on the fucking coast. They did not get along. You know, the people on the coast wanted peace with the Indians, stability, governance, taxation, and the Scots-Irish hated all of that. They said, no, fuck that. Leave us the fuck alone. We want the land. Let us fight the Indians, and anybody who tries to stop us is gonna get it. You know, there's gonna be trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Up to the point of laying siege to Philadelphia is still my favorite story in the book.
Going for that berserker stance.
Yeah, yeah. So that it's familiar, right? Because you can kind of see that you can see that throughout American political history, right up to the present day, where you have sort of these restive inland peoples who are in tension with very different peoples living more along the more built-up urban coastal areas.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a running theme in American politics. So I just found it very fascinating to see that reflected even in the Revolutionary period, if not, well, and the colonial period, really.
Yeah.
Generally. So pretty interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I'm definitely enjoying the book. It's nice when you can read a little bit and then kind of take time to think about it outside the like actual reading time itself, or talk to other people about it and kind of see what they know about that time period. Mm-hmm. Basically, very little is known other than like Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence because he was mad at the king. That's like cool. That's basically kind of the TLDR. George Washington had bad teeth and led America to victory. Okay. Like we didn't really learn about these regions, because I feel like what you're saying, where the ways that the regions fought amongst each other back in the day is kind of the same shit that's happening now, but people don't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, the commonalities are pretty extensive.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I thought of whenever you're saying that the South is more authoritarian was yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Just as a conversation thing. In Texas, it's kind of considered rude if your kids don't say that if they go to a parent's house. So we would be briefed on that. Of once we moved to Texas, they were like, okay guys, we're going over to Nathan's parents' house and you're going to say yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am for whenever you're addressing them. And that was like how you're expected to treat people, which is, it's kind of cool because people feel respected when they're addressed respectfully. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, respect is a big deal in the South.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's part of culture everywhere, but in the South in particular, like, there's almost like an honor culture that is residual, from an earlier period in history that still retains a lot of pull.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually watching a YouTube video from I don't want to say a think tank. It was like a historical institute. And they had a speaker give a presentation about American loyalists in the Revolutionary War. And while he was talking about it, one of the things he tried to explain was sort of the motive for loyalists to resist the revolution. And one of the things he really hit on a lot in the presentation was honor culture. A lot of people who were loyalists felt that they had been wronged by the revolutionaries for one reason or another, because they believed that their honor had been infringed upon. And a lot of it came down to just respect. They felt that they had been disrespected for having views that were considered antithetical to the revolution. And for that reason, they ended up becoming even more against the revolution, coming out even more in support of the king and taking more loyalist actions, like joining loyalist militias, joining the British Army, informing on revolutionaries, etc. And a lot of that was just respect, right? They felt that they were owed a certain amount of respect, and when they didn't get it because they had been slandered in the media, or perhaps because some kind of threats or perhaps even physical violence were perpetrated against them, they would try to seek redress. And that was pretty common throughout the colonies to varying degrees, but you don't see it as much today. But you do see it in the South, definitely, that the South, it still retains a lot of that. You kind of do see it in certain areas of the more urban parts of the country, like the Northeast and the Midwest, but in those cases, it's kind of more in the, I guess what you might call marginalized communities, communities that tend to suffer more from poverty and violence. In those communities, actually, there is a lot of emphasis on respect. In part specifically because there is less security, less law and order. And so people kind of have to rely on some of these older social institutions to provide a sense of security. So, there is something innately human about it, you could say. There is something about respect as a social mechanism by which to manage risk and uncertainty in life that is innate to human behavior. And we kind of default to that in the absence of those things.
Yep. I was talking a little bit about the concept of a monopoly on violence with Trisha, and just how ultimately when it comes to getting justice for things, if you don't have institutions that pursue justice for you, you have to pursue justice yourself. So if someone fucks with you or your family or your friends, no one's going to back you up unless they have a reason to, and you have like networking with them and you can motivate them to stand up for you. But aside from that, like, you're on your own. And that's part of why whenever people are out on the frontier and stuff, you don't really have that backup. And even in just like lower population areas in general that are harder to police or enforce in some way, also you kind of sometimes have to pursue your own justice. And that's a big part of why the people in Scandinavia were kind of so barbaric, was they would just go like fucking have like a hatred toward another house and just like burn all of their shit like in the night, just do really crazy hyper aggressive stuff like that. But they in a sense had to, because no one else is going to show up and say, okay, now we're going to get payback for you or decide that you were in the right or you were in the wrong. Like, you're out in the fucking fjords of Norway and there's not anyone for a really long distance, so good luck figuring out who's getting what for in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah, you really kind of have to depend on either yourself or your immediate network, and in the absence of authority, there's little alternative, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they've calmed down considerably since then.
Well, good.
Scandinavia is pretty chill these days.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I heard about a major raid emanating from the region.
Yeah, they don't really go pillaging anymore.
Yeah.
It's not as common. Viking stuff is definitely very sexy in modern media, though. They're selling Viking movies, Viking merch, Viking magazines, fucking Viking car commercials. And some of this, maybe I'm getting targeted ads, because I'll admit I do like Viking shit, because it's like, it's cool. Like, I watch the show, I think the clothes are cool, the style is cool, the fighting styles are cool, like two-handed axes or maces and stuff, and like having like fur armors and really low tech stuff, but just being tall and savage. It's like pretty cool. So yeah, there's that, and that's getting served to us, but it's a very romanticized version of Viking, and the Viking of the TV show is pretty different from how it was actually common to dress in that time period. One of the things that was really common for Vikings was they would have like really vivid color robes, like a really warm thing that they could wear that covered their whole body, kept them warm, and also had a really bright color. Was just pretty standard fashion. But the Vikings that we see on TV shows and stuff have like strappy leather shit. It's like strappy leather and fur, and it looks amazing, but that wasn't really like the common go-to look for people. Normally you would have like a really nice piece of garb, maybe with a belt or something, but it did have some pretty bright colors to it. Supposedly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, colors in history is something that modern historians have struggled with. Because they had that same problem with the ancient Greeks and Romans, right? For a long time, we just thought all their buildings and clothing were just sort of white or bland, and it turned out that they actually had a whole variety of colors that they painted them in, but we just hadn't known about them because the color had faded over time. And it's taken modern technology to kind of find some of the remnants of the pigments that have allowed us to reconstruct what it originally looked like. And it's very festive, weirdly so. It almost looks tacky.
Yeah.
But that was in vogue at that time. You know, people liked colors. They always have. So, you know, Vikings were no different, it seems.
Yeah, history, kind of like just normal present perception. It paints a always semi-distorted picture of what reality actually is. But we try our best.
Well,
Oh yeah,
fair,
Chad is mentioning that the terracotta army in China was all painted before.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and
Another
so were
example.
the pyramids. I think the pyramids were supposed to glow with like a really pretty white or something.
Yeah, well, they were originally covered in lime, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Like lime plates or blocks, something like that. And then they had a gold tip, I think, at the very top. So they actually would have originally looked what you might consider almost futuristic looking in their original form.
Yeah.
But a couple thousand years of pillaging kind of deals with that. All of that lime got taken off, the gold got pillaged. So,
well,
yeah,
in a
you're
sense, you have to basically pay for defense of that facility because it's so high value that people are just going to be like, I want a piece of this high value establishment over here. And once the Egyptian empire in its previous capacity is no longer there, then there's no one to enforce the rules there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an unfortunate pattern you see throughout history, right? You can look at examples like Roman aqueducts and roads. You know, those would get picked apart for resources by locals. And so what we're left with after thousands of years is just the stuff that the locals didn't get around to stealing.
Yeah.
Very similar phenomena in China with the Great Wall of China. Most of the original walls have been picked apart over time, with the bricks being used to build houses and, you know, other little projects by locals near the walls. Yeah, if you're going to build a big project, you got to maintain it. There's a lot of upkeep involved with building big things, and when the big states that build them go bankrupt or disappear, the projects tend to go with them, and they become shadows of their former selves.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of that throughout history. I mean, even now, if you look at like the Mississippi River in the United States, that might be a good example. Like rivers are supposed to move around. They're not actually fixed in position. You know, they bend, they change course, etc. But the Mississippi River has been sort of bound up by the Army Corps of Engineers, which is the institution here in the United States, which is largely responsible for public works projects. And they've built levees all along the river. Well, not all along it, but, you know, along most of its length. And they've gone out of their way to try to mitigate the degree to which the river can move in order, as basically as part of flood control measures. And if anything happens to the Army Corps of Engineers and the United States government, that's probably going to go away. And you would probably then see a return to the annual flooding that has historically been normal in the Mississippi River Basin.
Would that impact people?
Yeah, it would probably kill them.
I'm guessing I'm wondering like how many cities and or houses will get fucked up.
A lot.
A lot. Okay.
A lot. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you want an example, there's been two once in a century floods in the upper Mississippi around Iowa, and that was due to just heavier rain, unusually heavy. But what happened is that the river just burst its banks. Like there wasn't anything even the Army Corps of Engineers could do to keep the water in. Mm-hmm. And that combined with river water from tributaries overflowing, that was enough to just basically flood out a good chunk of the entire state.
Yeah.
So without regular levees, the annual flooding would flood out a lot of homes. There's not a whole lot of major cities along the Mississippi, but they would probably be significantly affected. And by significantly affected, I mean just flooded. Mm-hmm. And probably farmers would get the worst of it because some of the farmland along the Mississippi is amongst the most fertile in the world. But that would all get flooded out. That would actually be pretty good for the soil. It would probably rejuvenate the soil. Not so good for annual farm production, given that you basically would not be able to farm anything during the flood season because all of your crops would just get washed away.
Yeah, that would be a short-term bad thing, long-term good thing for the area.
Yeah, in the long term, you get more productive soil, but you're also in the short term losing a bunch of crops, and even in the long term, you're basically seeing a reduction in the planting season because you can't plant during the flood season, so you're losing that time that currently they get to use to grow stuff. So I don't think people think of the Army Corps of Engineers and their various flood control projects, not only along the Mississippi, but along other rivers as being mega projects. But given their scale and how impactful they are for the people in the relevant regions, that is an enormously important thing that the government does. And if that does go away, it'll have dramatic effects on the environment, the economy, and the people in those areas. Mm-hmm. So, there's just a lot of little things like that I guess we were talking about mega projects, but I would point out that there's a lot of little things like that the government does that people don't really think about and kind of take for granted, but which actually have big knock-on effects and are a major part of just what makes the world as we know it the way it is. And, part of living well is taking things for granted, right? That's kind of the point. You don't want to have to think about all the terrible shit happening around the world and constantly worrying about shit going wrong. So you do want to build a better world where people can take things for granted, but in so much as not taking things for granted is a net positive and makes people more wise and aware. Do keep in mind that, yes, there are a lot of hard-coded things in society that do require ongoing maintenance. It may not be that expensive or flashy, but it's important. And you would do well not to mess around too much with things like rule of law or institutions specifically so that you don't undermine things like that. Because if you do, then you're going to learn very quickly and the hard way just how important those institutions are to your day-to-day life. So I'm not sure how we got from mega projects to that, but I'm always eager to talk about institutions. So I guess I subconsciously took the M.
It's okay. So we were talking about monopoly on violence and police force and how pursuing justice. Someone has to do it. It's all good. We veer around here in world discussion. So far, we haven't talked about any current events. So anyone who's tuning in is like, wait, what are we talking about? Don't worry about it. You didn't miss anything yet in terms of current events. I don't even know what happened this week. It's been a relatively busy week for me.
Gosh, what did happen this week? I didn't even look. Let's see. That's not new. There's been some stuff with Guyana again, but that's just gunboat diplomacy, so that's not really a big deal. Guyana and Venezuela have a territorial dispute. They agreed to talk it out in December, but then it was reported that Venezuela has been mobilizing some troops near the border. And so that had some people wondering if maybe the deal was off and maybe there's going to be violence. But I read that talks actually just got started in Brazil between the two governments. And the deployment of troops happened like the day of the talks starting. So that's not a coincidence. That's definitely the Venezuelan government trying to flex on Guyana and try to send a subtle message that they need to give them what they want, or there could be trouble in the talks. Probably just posturing. I don't think the Guyanese are going to take it too seriously. They do have the implicit backing of the United States government, and if the Venezuelan government wants to give the United States government an excuse to mess with them, messing with Guyana will certainly do the trick. So we'll see what happens. It's probably just going to get talked out. I don't doubt that there's going to be more drama, but I don't think it'll be substantive drama.
Gotcha.
There was some Ukraine news. The Ukrainian, I guess, I was going to say the government, but I guess the president, Zelensky, removed the head of the Ukrainian army.
Oh.
So that has a lot of people in Ukraine worried. There's kind of been tension between them for a while. Zelensky was a little perturbed at the lack of progress on the front, especially in the big counteroffensive. And Zelensky, for his part, has been talking a little too vocally and openly about the dearth of supplies coming in from Ukraine's allies in Europe and North America. That's not really a problem per se. Obviously the Ukrainian government goes out of its way to complain about a lack of support and supplies, but Zelensky was kind of implying that the government was at fault for that and needed to do more, which Zelensky and the government didn't much appreciate. So the reason a lot of people are upset that he's leaving is because he had been fairly widely respected, not only in Ukraine generally, but in the Ukrainian army specifically. He was seen as shepherding the country through sort of the dark period of 2022. He's seen as a more modern leader. He doesn't do a lot of like the old school Soviet stuff, where you kind of use people as cannon fodder. So people appreciated that he was taking a more modern approach to leadership and running the army. And he also had a pretty positive relationship with Western military liaison officers. In general, he seemed to get along with them, as well as with Western officials generally. So he seemed like he was doing pretty well overall, but it seems that performance issues and tensions with the Zelensky government have resulted in his removal. The government did say that they wanted him to stay involved in the war, but that he would no longer be basically chief of staff of the army as he had been. So they're going to find somebody new, and it's not clear who can fill that role. The two names that were floated in the article that I read both came with some pretty serious problems. One of them Zelensky likes personally, which is always a big advantage in a political culture like Ukraine's, but the downside is that he is not popular in the army. He is very much seen in the army as an old school officer who doesn't know how to lead a modern army and who is very wasteful of both resources and his men's lives. He's kind of been associated with these frontal assaults that lead to very large casualties, and that's not popular, to put it mildly. So that's one guy. The other guy is more popular, still not as popular as Zelensky, but the issue with him is that he's unproven. If I remember correctly, this guy that I'm thinking of was head of the special forces in Ukraine. But he's never led like a major unit, certainly not something as large as the entire Ukrainian army. So people are not entirely sure he would be up to the job. So there's a little uncertainty there. And it's not clear just what his relationship is with Zelensky, so it's not even clear how serious his candidacy is at this point. So something to watch. We'll see how it goes. But for now, the situation in Ukraine is still largely static. Some people online, I've noticed, don't like it when you say it's stalemated. And when I say people online, I don't mean people in chat, but like analysts kind of argue about that. So it's not that nothing is happening. There is fighting happening. There is territory being exchanged. But the amount of ground lost or gained is pretty small right now and has been for months. And the casualties are still relatively high in those attacks. So even if there's still stuff happening, not much is really changing in terms of the front line right now. And it's not clear if that's going to change anytime soon. So the news about Zaluzhny is the only major news that I'm aware of vis-a-vis Ukraine. There is other stuff to talk about. You know, Russia has been attacking energy infrastructure in Ukraine with ranged weaponry like cruise missiles and drones. They've also been blowing up random civilian targets. I'm not even sure what they're going for there. There's a bakery that was hit, an apartment that was hit. You know, just random shit.
Hit him in the biscuits.
Yeah, fuck up, I guess. I guess that's supposed to be the modern equivalent of terror bombing. You know, trying to intimidate the civilian populace into ending the fighting. But you know, if you know anything about the history of bombing in that vein, you know it never works. So I don't know what the fuck they're expecting. But that's a thing too. But that's basically the norm at this point. I mean, I'm surprised when they're not blowing up random bullshit for arbitrary reasons. So yeah, that's where Ukraine is the last time I checked. I would throw out the usual disclaimer here. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please do correct me. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. I don't read chat while we do this, so I won't see the feedback right away, but I do go back and pick through chat after we finish when it's posted on the archive here. So I will see it eventually. So feedback and participation by chat is encouraged in that regard.
Appreciate you, chat. Thanks for hanging out. If you have any questions, you can weigh in throughout the conversation, or if we get something dead wrong, we sometimes go over corrections, so there's a chance we can redeem ourselves.
Well, have we talked about kind of the general conservative swing in European politics over the past year or two?
No, what's going on with that?
Basically, the centrist parties over the past decade or so have been losing legitimacy. That was something we talked about years ago when we first started the segment. Mm-hmm. But in the past year or two, there's been more traction on that. You know, all of the economic crises stemming from the pandemic and the energy crisis stemming from the war in Ukraine, as well as tension over things like the green transition. You know, all of that is kind of building into a crescendo of support for alternative parties of one kind or another. And it's starting to create waves now in various European polities to varying degrees. You know, in Germany, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, has been polling much stronger than it had been before. And there's some question about whether or not, there's some question as to how well they'll do in the next election, which may not be too far away given how unpopular the current government is. Keep in mind, the current government in Germany is a coalition government involving the main center-left party, the SPD, the Green Party, and then what in Europe is called a liberal party, which is to say a pro-free market, pro-business party. It's a kind of odd combination. It's never been a particularly stable coalition, and a lot of the contradictions have kind of been coming to the fore over the past year. In particular, one of the things that really has hurt them was the whole fiasco over heat pumps. Are you familiar with this whole debate about heat pumps?
Heat pumps? What is a heat pump?
So a heat pump is an alternative to the normal arrangement for heating a home. Normally, homes are heated with natural gas systems. You know, you have a natural gas pipe that comes into the home, brings in natural gas, it gets burned in some kind of device and generates heat that warms the home. So that obviously uses fossil fuels, the natural gas, and it releases emissions, which is bad for the climate. So what Greens have wanted to do is to replace all of those systems with heat pumps, which is an electric system that doesn't use any kind of natural gas or whatnot, and instead just uses a mechanism by which heat is just transferred in order to kind of generate heat. And that's not the best explanation you'll hear of what a heat pump is, but I'm not an engineer, so I don't have the best explanation. But basically, it's a fully electrified heating system, no natural gas required.
Yeah, Fuzzy Code is saying that air conditioners and refrigerators are types of heat pumps.
There you go. So that's the idea. And what the Green Party in Germany wanted to do was to try to encourage people to buy those on their own, with perhaps some subsidies. And that was very unpopular. People got very upset about that. Because as it happens, heat pumps are fairly expensive. Keep in mind, the expense of a heat pump is not just in buying the mechanism, but also in installation and maintenance. And, I mean, if you're sort of middle class or upper class, you could probably afford it. But for a lot of people in the working class, not so much. And a lot of people felt that the government was kind of foisting a cost upon them without compensating them. And people in general, not only in Germany, but around the world, are pretty iffy about the green transition in so much as it actually burdens them personally with costs. In polling, people are generally very much believing, that is to say, people very much believe in climate change and want something, quote unquote, to be done about it. They just don't really want to pay for it. Therein lies the problem. So the Green Party's policy of trying to strongly encourage, if not mandate, people replace these older natural gas systems with heat pumps pissed off like big chunks of the populace. And of course, it was exacerbated by partisan politics, right? The AFD went out of their way to try to milk it for everything it was worth. So it turned into a big issue that kind of dented their popularity, and more broadly, the popularity of the coalition they were in. And there's general discontent in Germany just because of economic conditions. A lot of people think the war in Ukraine has been too burdensome for Germany, and that it would be better just to resume trading with Russia. Not everybody believes that, not even a majority, but there is a pretty growing, strong minority that is of that mind. And more recently, there was the whole fiasco about the budget. I think we talked about that last time. Last year, they had the Supreme Court vote that the government was misusing COVID funds to provide subsidies to farmers, and that blew a hole in the German budget that couldn't be filled since they're supposed to keep a balanced budget. And so the result is that subsidies that were promised to farmers have not been delivered, and the result now in the past couple of weeks has been big protests by farmers, as well as people of like mind in Germany against the government. So a lot of things are going wrong for the center-left government right now. People are disenchanted, and in general, that's translated into growing support for the AFD. Whether or not that'll be enough to actually get them in power, pretty debatable. In general, everybody kind of agrees that the AFD should be kept out of power. There's kind of an implicit norm in German politics by which parties like AFD are effectively ostracized. So I don't know that even if they win big in the next election, that it'll mean anything. But that said, there is that sort of trend in Germany, as well as in the rest of Europe, where you can see more and more support for them. And so invariably, that's going to mean more conservative policy by the other parties. They're going to shift their political campaign platform to try to eat away at support for the AFD by kind of picking away some of their supporters by adopting policies that are more popular with AFD supporters. They've already done that with immigration. We've come a long way from Angela Merkel's "we can do it" immigration policy, where they let in a whole shit ton of people. They're not doing that anymore. Immigration is not popular, and successive governments in Germany now have gone out of their way to try to control immigration as well as reform asylum laws, and that it seems likely that's going to continue. But also now it looks like there's going to be moderation in green transition policies, since that seems to be aggravating people too. Mind you, I don't say this as a judgment. I'm not endorsing one or the other position. I'm just saying the political calculus suggests that's what's going to happen, because the SPD, as well as the CDU, are going to want to prevent further erosion of their voting base to alternative parties, like the AFD. And invariably, that means changing their position to try to balance, the loss of support. And we'll see what that looks like. In France, they have big protests. I mean, everybody's pretty familiar with France at this point. It's kind of a tripartite clusterfuck between sort of Macron and his En Marche party, the socialists on the left, and then sort of Le Pen on the right. And Macron has been losing ground, but at this point, neither Le Pen nor the socialists or the left. I don't even remember what they have a big left wing party in France. I forget what it's called. It's led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon. I remember his name. I don't remember what he called the coalition though. But neither the left nor the right in French politics is sufficiently popular to win power on its own. And the result is that centrist voters have been the kingmakers in French politics for the past 10 years. And they have used that power basically to elect Macron and to keep both the socialist and Le Pen out of power. So whether or not that equilibria can continue is debatable. Macron is losing popularity, but it's not clear how much of that is translating into a critical mass of support for one of the other alternatives. So France does have an election coming up, so we're going to see the answer to that soon. But in general, I think Le Pen has been able to benefit from some of the drama over the past year, in particular in France. There's been, myriad little scandals here and there that have undermined Macron's popularity to the point where Macron, had a big cabinet shuffle to try to shake things up and get some new leadership in. I think one of his new officials is particularly popular, but that's probably not going to be enough to diffuse the pressure on him. So that's another big item to watch, the French election. Italy already has a right-wing government, so that's case in point. Giorgia Meloni, and that's probably not how her name is pronounced. Giorgi Meloni. That's my best guess as to the pronunciation. Is the leader effectively of a right-wing party that actually had its roots in fascism. They've changed and moderated significantly since then, but the fact that a party with that kind of background was able to win in Italy was pretty notable, if not just wild in general.
Sorry, what was the background again?
Originally, it was a fascist authoritarian movement.
Oh, okay.
yeah. So not very popular when it started, but they've moderated since then, and so they were able to win enough votes to get into power.
They've simmered down a little bit.
Yeah, they kind of backed off of the old fascism a bit. But the fact that a group like that could win at all just shows how much has changed in European politics. Mm-hmm. For a long time in Europe, there was a kind of political cordon sanitaire around parties of that ilk, or even parties that were in the same ballpark as parties like that. But now, disenchantment with the status quo, and especially with the liberal establishment, has reached the point where parties like that can make some headway. Geert Wilders actually did really well in the Netherlands' most recent election. I didn't even know he was still in politics. That kind of surprised me. I thought he'd retired. But no, he was still around, and his right-wing party actually did very well. Geert Wilders is like the OG populist. Mm-hmm. There was kind of a big wave of populism in the West over the past 10 years, but Geert Wilders was doing it way back in like 2001, 2003. Because I remember back during the early war on terror, he was one of the big voices in Europe that was complaining about Muslims and Islamist terrorists and immigration and all that kind of stuff. And he was kind of a fringe guy back then, but he's still in the game, and he's kind of riding high most recently. His party did really well in the election. It's not looking like he'll be able to get into power, even in spite of the strong showing. A lot of the other parties are pretty skeptical about working with him. Again, that's that cordon sanitaire at work. So they may end up with a minority government in the Netherlands, or perhaps some kind of grand coalition of center-left and center-right parties. It's not clear as of yet, but the election was a couple months ago, and the negotiations to form a new government are still ongoing, which gives you an idea of how contentious they are. And Scandinavia has been getting more conservative, too. There's a lot more discontent over crime and immigration there. There's relatively more crime in Sweden than there used to be, noticeably so, up to the point where news about killings and gang activity is basically the norm now, to a degree that it was not before. And it's generally centered around some of the immigration areas, some of the gateway communities in which immigrants have kind of moved into and dominated, have kind of been the center of that. And that's, obviously there's invariably going to be people that hate that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people were pretty skeptical about letting in so many asylum seekers, refugees, et cetera, in the first place. So a lot of them feel vindicated now and are trying to leverage that into political success.
They're like, see, this is not fun.
Yeah, it's kind of a "I told you so" moment for them.
Mm-hmm.
Other people argue that it's not as bad as all that, and that the problem is more about failed integration policies than it is about immigration. And so there is merit to that argument as well. And I would also point out, speaking as an American, the levels of crime in Sweden are still laughably low compared to those in the United States. So, from my perspective, I don't really know what you're complaining about. We deal with far worse here in the U.S. on a fairly regular basis. But I guess if you're not used to that, then I could see why it would be fairly contentious. So I guess I would concede that much. But you guys are a long way away from Detroit or Dallas.
Yeah, could be worse. It is unfortunate that it did increase the crime level, though, because it's always a nice achievement of a society if they can have a really low homicide rate.
Yeah, that's sort of where the debate is right now. So we'll see how that goes. Immigration policy in places like Sweden and Denmark have significantly tightened up over the past 5 years, and will probably get tighter. So that's probably going to be the trend for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm.
That conservative shift in terms of immigration is going to be a big part of European politics going forward. It would seem, at least until the immigration crisis, ebbs at whatever point. Because for now, there's still a lot of people getting into Europe. Now, there's a couple countervailing examples here. In Poland, the Law and Justice Party actually lost the election a couple months ago. And so the opposition's civil union, was able to get back into power as part of a coalition government. It wasn't just them. They had some other parties too. But Law and Justice is in the opposition now for the first time in many years. And the new government is focused on trying to rebuild. They say that they're trying to rebuild law and order in the country. They argue that the Law and Justice Party was more about obtaining power for itself and trying to rig the game in their favor, which is not entirely a fair criticism. The whole tiff about rule of law in Poland was actually started by the civic union in the first place, but that's a whole argument unto itself. But to be fair, even though the civic union started it, Law and Justice definitely made it worse. So there does seem to be an attempt to buy the new party to try to reverse that trend and try to get Poland kind of back on track in terms of building democratic institutions. For example, by rebuilding an independent judiciary, which Law and Justice wasn't all that interested in. Whether or not they can do that, or whether or not they're being genuine about doing that, that's also debatable. Law and Justice supporters say that the new government is just trying to concentrate power in its hands, and that they're basically just doing what Law and Justice did, but for themselves. I don't really think that's true. It's not really my reading. I mean, to be fair, if you are going to undo the changes that were made by Law and Justice, invariably you are going to have to remove a lot of the people that were placed in positions of responsibility by the Law and Justice Party. And, if you're a supporter of Law and Justice, that's going to look like dispossession, but, really that's just reform. I don't really think civic union can win in that regard. Either they do nothing, in which case the Law and Justice Party will approve, but then they've done nothing in that case to build rule of law in Poland and reaffirm democratic institutions. But if they do take action and try to make changes and reforms, invariably Law and Justice will be upset, because that's going to invariably involve undermining the changes that they made that favored them and their party. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. Not an unusual situation in politics. The civic union is powering through. All the best. I hope they're genuine. I hope the reforms work. We'll see. Nothing is certain right now.
I'm a little bit confused. You were saying that the Law and Justice Party isn't really good at having an independent judiciary? I thought they're Law and Justice. That's kind of...
You know how it is in politics.
All right.
happy fun time love party is not going to be about having a happy time or having fun.
Oh no.
No, it's just names are bullshit.
Right.
There was an old Jon Stewart joke. It was basically the more friendly and happy the name of a country, the more horrible it is. And the example par excellence was Democratic Republic of the Congo, a country which is neither truly democratic nor really a republic.
But both of those things are good to have and pursue. Probably.
Yeah. If you want to go even harder, you can go for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Oh, yeah. DPRK.
Yeah. Which is none of those things, other than perhaps Korean.
Yeah, imagine Republican and Democrat being in the same title. The U.S. wouldn't allow it.
Oh, people would pitch a fit.
Mm-hmm.
Although that did actually happen at one time. Have you ever heard of the era of good feeling?
No.
So that was a period from roughly 1815 to maybe 1820. I'm probably misremembering the era, but roughly that's the time frame we're talking about. This was a period in American history when there was actually pretty good relations between disparate political groups in the United States and where partisanship was at a nadir. So people weren't really fighting too much. People were kind of okay with the status quo. And it was a pretty chill time. And it came to be known as the era of good feeling. And in that time, the principal party was the Democratic Republican Party.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Bit of column A, bit of column B. We're chilling. Yeah, the way that you name stuff is interesting. It's definitely an anchor point for how it's perceived, even if it isn't true. So they can use their name as a cloak. People's Republic of Korea.
Indeed.
More like the dictator's happy place where he can do what he wants and always wins at golf.
Actually, North Korea has been in the news a little bit. Have you heard anything about that?
No.
Yeah, they've been doing their usual drama queen routine. They kind of been, they do that pretty much continuously, but it kind of waxes and wanes depending. And right now, it's definitely in the ascendant. Let me see if I can find the notes on that. Yeah. So let's see. In January, Kim Jong-un announced that North Korea will, quote, end peaceful efforts to reunify Korea and designate South Korea its main enemy, end quote.
What? They're not already their main enemy? Is that us?
Yeah, that had traditionally been the United States.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. U.S. big bad. That's fair if we're your main enemy.
Yeah, but they're shifting gears now.
But now South Korea is.
Yeah. Now South Korea is going to be the main bad guy. He also said that North Korea he said that North Korea should, quote unquote, change its constitution to end all reunification institutions in North Korea. And also, just to add a little spice, he threatened a nuclear attack on the South, called for a buildup of the country's military arsenal, and he also launched some missiles in surrounding environs and launched some live fire exercises close to South Korean territory.
Okay, so making quite a bit of noise. Wonder why.
Yeah, well, the why is the interesting bit. So, for one, there's near famine conditions in North Korea owing to economic dislocation from the pandemic, which North Korea still hasn't recovered from. Trade with China declined significantly, for example, because of COVID restrictions, travel restrictions specifically. Also, well, I think that's the main thing. The economy just hasn't been doing as good, and the government kind of is trying to compensate for it. Also, the government has been cracking down on, what would you call it, the infiltration of South Korean culture, I guess.
Oh, yeah, basically really attractive South Korean music videos distracting their people from worshiping the dictator. I get it.
Well, the issue, it's always been illegal to watch foreign media including South Korean media, but they've been cracking down on it more recently because the government feels more insecure. And the penalties are especially high for consuming South Korean media because that's seen as much more threatening to the regime. They actually don't care nearly as much if you watch American media, which I thought was interesting. Like if you want to binge watch Friends, you can do that, and maybe if you get caught, you'll get in a little bit of trouble. But man, if you watch K-dramas, that's a fucking death sentence.
Yeah, you can't do that.
You can't do that. So, yeah, the government's feeling a little iffy right now, and it's translating into more repression, unfortunately, and also into a more, as you say, a more vocal foreign policy, as you can see.
Vocal as in talking shit.
Yeah. Well, that's very much the North Korean style.
I'm not even worried for South Korea. We were actually talking about the StarCraft pros who still have to do their military conscription, even though they're like an esport athlete. It's like, no, you still have to do your year and a half. And we're just imagining like a lot of the best Protoss players are in the military right now in South Korea. So I was thinking if they have any really advanced military tech or like microing lots of different drones in different areas, like I would think a Protoss player would be really good at that because they're good at like adept attacks and a lot of different unexpected timing attacks and that sort of thing. Like sending a Protoss pro gamer at like the strategy table for military would be great. They're not just some normal grunt. These are like insane masterminds that are just over there and they have to do their training with everybody else. They even have a special division for the StarCraft pros, I think, where they get to do certain stuff. Like they get to practice a little bit. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, Cyril has to do military conscription. He's from Finland. He's currently considered to be the best player in the world in StarCraft 2. And he got the athlete distinction, which means he, I think, doesn't have to serve for as long. And he can also make requests to, like, say, go and compete in an event if he wants to. So they're trying to give him a little bit of space to still do that because he's a national hero at this point.
A national hero for being good at StarCraft.
I mean,
he's living the dream, isn't he?
Finland is fairly low population, so to have the best in the world person at something, I think it's something to be proud of.
Yeah, fair point.
We have the best in the world person at something that's really hard to do. He golfs in his free time.
Many people do.
Yeah.
Do you remember my ex-girlfriend?
Mm-hmm.
She does that.
Golf, yeah.
She got into golfing.
Nice. I think it's a really good sport for going outside, getting fresh air. You actually get a decent bit of walking in because you're walking from place to place. And you get a little bit of physical exertion, but it's just nice. The only thing that was tough for me was that oftentimes people golf early in the morning, and that's like not something I normally do. I've been more of a morning person since moving here to LA.
Oh, yeah. I was meaning to ask you about that. How's the LA expedition going?
It's been really good. The crazy thing is how many like high effort people are all in the same area. Mm-hmm. It's like it's mainly artistic types, specifically where I am, but just the number of people who are here and they're working hard to do something cool and unique, and like how, like you were saying, how important connections are of knowing people. Mm-hmm. But also seeing too that there's a lot of celebrity worship and stuff, but celebrities are just people too, and they look like normal people a lot of the time. Movies and TV and stuff, people get very done up. You have like perfect lighting. There's someone who does your hair and makeup before you go on stage and stuff. So the perception that we have of the average person is like pretty inaccurate if you're comparing that to what normal humans are actually like. People a little bit more regular.
Very much so.
Yeah, it's been good. Been having a nice time. It's been rainy, which is kind of funny because I've moved to a much drier climate here than Seattle, and it's been just raining the whole time. So, not the whole time. Today was almost not a cloud in the sky, which is cool. But lots of unique sounds. One funny thing that I did was I wore a Smeagol mask and I was running around in the streets, like making some silly short TikTok videos and stuff of like Smeagol looking for the precious and
Doing the voice and everything, being on the streets.
I had no shirt and then the mask on, so basically Gollum with pants walking around. Some people would look at me like, what the fuck? But I got at least 5 people who took out their phone and either filmed me or took a picture. So that was fun. There are a lot of silly characters and stuff that wander the streets here, so I wasn't really that out of place.
Yeah, I imagine LA has quite a few eccentric people.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, definitely keep me abreast of the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Very curious about LA.
Yeah. One of the things I'm going to start working on this week is applying for acting castings and photography castings, or for modeling, basically. Yeah, there's different postings of, hey, we need people of this description to do a commercial for this or a short film or whatever. So I would be starting with relatively low level stuff, but I now have a set of professionally done headshots that are recent. So all I need now is basically to go through the different postings of what opportunities are out there. And then for each of them, normally you have to reply with videos back at them of you have to introduce yourself, talk about the role and why you want it, and basically give them a pitch of why they should choose you, kind of a thing.
Mm.
Never done that before, so humbling and cool to go at a new skill set. But I feel like I have a lot of improv chops just from doing musical theater with Michael back in the day, and then also streaming and having all these characters and stuff where I'll be in character for hours or sometimes days at a time. I feel like it's something that I have gotten a lot of laps in. The thing that will be new for me is instead of making a character that I want to make, I'll be making a character that someone else wants to make.
Ah.
Yeah, which I haven't practiced as much relatively. But I already got asked to do a music video. They need apparently 4 metal-looking dudes, and it's some ladies' music video. So,
Cool.
Yes, I will be metal dude number 3 or some shit.
There you go.
Yeah.
Got your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm stoked.
It should be fun. What, do you want to hear some more about North Korean slavery?
Yeah, how bad is it?
Pretty bad. So what they'll do is that they'll set up companies in northeastern China, and then they'll send people from North Korea that are recruited specifically to work there. And these people are vetted basically for loyalty. If they have any family history of defections or a criminal record, they won't let them go. So they want them to go there, stay there, and work there. Mm-hmm. And the arrangement is that they'll give them some of the money that they earn. The operations are generally fairly profitable, but the workers generally are not paid regularly, partly to incentivize them to stay. And generally when they are paid, they only receive a fraction of the actual wages that they receive. Most of the wages are garnished by the North Korean government, which is the nominal business owner, and kept for their own purposes. And conditions got especially bad during the pandemic because obviously there was a big downturn. And so, of course, when there's a downturn, you kind of have to cut costs, right? But, if you're running the modern day equivalent of a slave plantation, you don't really have a lot of costs to cut. So what they would do is that they would pay them even less and less frequently, to the point where there was almost a riot, apparently recently, in which a bunch of workers found out that they were not going to be paid at all, and that they would just have to stay and keep working on the promise that they would be paid in future, which was apparently not sufficient for them. So they apparently, supposedly, again, this is all very difficult to verify, but from what I was reading, they allegedly assaulted their manager, which if true would be pretty dramatic because, you don't really want to fuck around too much with North Korea's government officials. So, if they did something bad enough to get beaten up, it must have been pretty bad. The tensions must have been running very high. So one of the things they would do during the pandemic is that they would actually just lock them in the building that they worked in, right? Because
What
these
the
are
fuck?
factories that they work in. That's not that unusual. Like even before the pandemic, they would largely restrict them to the building, and they would reward people who performed well, who were good workers, with forays outside of the building. So you could go out, maybe visit a place, go have some fun, or just something, whatever. Just go outside the house, and then they would have to come back. And of course, that again was only though for the good workers. Everybody else just has to stay at the factory. But during the pandemic, everybody had to stay. The government was afraid people would flee because they weren't making any money, and so they were just completely they were completely restricted to the site. And that, of course, just was very hard for people. One of the things I thought was interesting, I'm sure the internet will like this. One of the things they would do to reward the best workers, and they did this even during the pandemic, is they would let them go to a North Korean restaurant, which obviously would be off-site. So you would get to leave the factory and go to the restaurant, have some food. And, oh, by the way, you would also have the choice of the waitresses to sleep with for the night.
What?
Yeah.
Oh.
So one of these dissidents who used to work in one of these factories kind of accused the North Korean government of abusing the men, basically taking advantage of their sexual urges, because these are young men, and you know how young men are, like they're the horniest animals on the planet. So one of the ways the North Korean government would try to pacify its workers in these factories, who again were largely restricted to a single site and were not allowed to leave and were not really being paid. One of the ways they would try to deal with that is to basically just give them a free restaurant meal and sex. So if you want an example of how to deal with slaves in the modern era, there you go. That's how it's being done.
Damn. That's pretty interesting. I haven't really thought about incentivizing if you don't have money to give. What do you do? Locking people in there overnight or incentivizing them staying. It makes sense from like, where your assets are all the time. It's not good for ethics or humanitarian values of treating people with dignity.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're treating people as objects, then that would make sense to do that. And then, yeah, abusing people's sexual urges and stuff. That's a bummer. Definitely empathize with the horniness thing. It happens. It happens every day.
Yeah. Yeah, but you also have to feel sorry for the women too, because a lot of them are
for sure
being coerced as well.
Yeah.
The waitresses probably were not told that was going to be part of the job when they set out. I imagine their situation is much the same as the North Korean workers in the factories.
I feel like it's so bad for everyone. Like, how do you get a foothold in sort of revolution? We've been talking about this since we were living with Kukyo. Like, this is a very old conversation for us of like, why doesn't North Korea revolt? When can we get this going? He's like, do we need planes? Do we need helicopters? Like, what do we need to do? Let's just fucking Batman it.
I mean, the biggest problem with any society in dire straits is inertia. For one, not everybody is doing badly. I mean, there's always a small percentage of the population that's doing very well, the very well-connected people. And then there's a somewhat larger percentage of people who are doing pretty well, not good per se, but they're comfortable. There's been a significant upsurge over the past 20 years in North Korea of independent entrepreneurs. So if you're among the more successful, well-connected entrepreneurs operating in the black market in North Korea, you're doing okay. And so for them, a revolution, has its advantages, but it also kind of threatens their status quo. And a lot of them are not going to be all that interested in that. And then there's also people who are just so uneducated and whose worldview is just so small and narrow, and who are so narrowly focused on survival that anything beyond survival is just asking too much. They can't think big, they can't plan big. They're just so focused on where their next meal is coming from. That the idea of organizing a revolution or networking or doing anything that would be prerequisite to that is the furthest thing from their mind. That's pretty true everywhere. It's no accident that most revolutions are not peasant revolutions. certainly not most successful revolutions. Most successful revolutions are actually organized by disaffected middle class, by members of the disaffected middle class in a given society, if not also disaffected elites within that society. Peasants are generally the cannon fodder of the revolution. They'll go along with it once it gets started and it seems to have momentum, but there's more than a few working class people that have gone along with the revolution, not because they necessarily believe in it, but because they're offering food and board, which again is very high on their list of priorities. So North Korea does not really have much of a middle class, which is a major barrier in and of itself. In so much as there is a middle class, they're either co-opted or they're intimidated into complying with the status quo. And one of the problems with North Korea is that its society has not really undergone the transition that most societies undergo when they industrialize, which is to move away from a sort of a more communal, rural-oriented culture to a more atomized, individualistic urban culture. North Korea didn't really do that. Like, it started out as a mostly rural society at the beginning of its coexistence. And as it urbanized and industrialized, that entire process was largely co-opted and micromanaged by the Communist Party. And they, of course, had no interest in allowing the sort of natural organic emergence of civil society or a middle class or any potential center of power that could oppose them. So, everything that is even remotely modern or urban in North Korea is almost invariably heavily involved with and directly controlled by the Communist Party of Korea. And everything else is just, really everything else is backwards. Everything else in the rural areas and whatnot has not changed dramatically from 50 years ago. And a lot of the political culture is not all that different than it was in sort of the peasant era, the era of the era before the revolution. If you have a mass of uneducated peasants at your disposal and you're an authoritarian one-party state, you have the option of uplifting them, enlightening them, giving them modern living conditions. Or alternatively, you can just keep them ignorant and use them for your own purposes. And the North Korean government has obviously chosen to go with the latter. And one of the upshots of doing it like that from the perspective of the Communist Party is that people don't really have the education or ideals or ideas that even give them any notions of revolution. The only revolution they know of is the communist revolution, and that revolution supposedly has been successful in North Korea, so the government says, and there is no need for further revolution. So everybody can just stay home and enjoy the fruits of their victory over the forces of imperialism and capitalism.
Whew, that was a close one.
Yeah. So, a revolution in North Korea would be very difficult. The fact that it's an authoritarian state, the fact that it's an authoritarian police state, more specifically, which has very extensive control, which exercises extensive controls over its population and all levels of society, means that even if there were forces that could organize against the government, they would face very long odds. Mm-hmm. So in a society as hierarchical as North Korea, the most likely prospects for a successful revolution are if elites within the Communist Party itself decide that their prospects are better if there was a revolution that changed the government.
Or if the military decides to coup?
Same thing, basically.
Yeah.
The military itself constitutes an elite faction within the North Korean government.
Right. That would be a type of elite, yeah.
Yeah. The military, the intelligence agency, and internal security forces are probably your main elite groups in North Korea. Mm-hmm. Economic planners are probably up there, but I think they're second fiddle to the security forces. Mm-hmm. Given that it is basically a Stalinist police state, security forces are going to be paramount. A less securitized communist state would put more power in the hands of the economic planners, which is kind of what you saw with China and the Soviet Union. So that bureaucracy of communism, the bureaucracy of central planning, was probably the biggest force within the political economy in those states. But North Korea never did that. They never really transitioned away from what you might call war communism, into something resembling a normal style of communism, in so much as there can be said to be such a thing. And as a result, the security forces never abdicated their paramount position within the political economy, and they have retained their de facto monopoly on the exercise of power within North Korea's political system correspondingly. So somebody within one of those factions would have to turn on the established government in order for there to be a revolution. And I would add, in order for it to be a true revolution, that faction would also have to not only want to seize power for itself, but also change the form of government. It's not inevitable that if there were a revolution, that it would necessarily be a revolution designed to change the government. Most likely it would be one group of disaffected elites trying to overturn the elites in power that they're mad with so that they can replace them with themselves. So effectively replacing one elite group with another. But that doesn't involve changing the government. That's just basically changing who the master of the plantation is. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's not really what people are thinking of when they're talking about revolution in North Korea.
Yeah.
So you would have to find some kind of reformist faction within the elites of North Korea who want to make substantive changes, not only to the elites in power, but to the system of government. And that's going to be go ahead.
I would think that there would be some big advantages in just opening up entertainment, like you're mentioning K-drama and the pour of information from across the border and how they're trying to limit that. It's like, just make your own shit then. Like, I feel like let people catch up with the meta of entertainment, because they're falling behind the world in a lot of categories by being so limited, which means that the people in power also have less to benefit from because their society is ill, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be made to that effect, but with any centralized political system, opening up the economy opens up the possibility of alternative poles of power emerging, because economic forces are political forces. Mm-hmm. And so opening up the economy means more entrepreneurs, it means more independent businesses, and all of those can produce people with access to significant resources that they could mobilize against the power elite. Mm-hmm. And so they're very paranoid about that. Authoritarian political systems are very loath to allow true free market economic activity because they really want to control everything, because that's the only way they really ever feel safe. They want to know that all of the major resources in the country that could be used to create a new independent power structure are firmly under their control or under the control of people that are loyal to them. So there's an immense amount of aversion to any kind of liberalization within North Korea, given just how dependent the established elite are on control. I mean, they have not allowed for any kind of openness in the political system. And that being the case, any kind of liberalization is a threat, because there is that risk that something could happen to destabilize the government and potentially lead to an actual revolution. Perhaps localized elites or mid-level elites maybe banding together. Revolutions are not always revolutions dedicated to the overthrow of the government. Sometimes they just start off with people at a local level or a mid-tier level of government angry about something the government does and basically just making trouble to try to extort the government into giving them what they want. So that's effectively what the American Revolution was. Like, originally, it was not about breaking away from Britain, right? Originally, there were just issues that we were upset about and wanted to be redressed. And the threat was that if they were not redressed, then we would continue to fight and, maybe we'll declare independence. But obviously the British were not interested in concessions, and so the initial spat of unrest and violence just kind of spiraled out organically into a revolution. So that kind of unpredictable spiraling, that especially is what security services in North Korea are worried about, probably more so than disaffected elites. They keep tabs on all of the elites, so they would probably see that coming. Doesn't mean they would stop it. It would depend on how much the security services benefited from the change, but they would know about it. But you don't necessarily know how close you are to this sort of tit-for-tat spiral of recriminations and violence that can happen unpredictably, that can lead into a general collapse of state authority. So that's the kind of thing that they're more worried about. That's unlikely for the reasons that I already kind of pointed out. But if you're a security official being paid to worry about stability, you're not being paid to shrug your shoulders and say, it's probably fine. You're going to worry about it, and you're going to take actions corresponding to that. And that invariably means maintaining this massive police state apparatus that just maintains the entire population under, effectively a reign of terror, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an opaque system as well, so it's hard for us to know as outsiders, like, what do people actually talk about when they have privacy? Are there people who are like kind of grumbling and or planning, or do you just kind of accept the system for what it is and just figure out how you can improve your own position in the current system?
Yeah.
Which I think that's the path of less resistance, is to not try to overthrow everything. That's like the final option.
Exactly. Yeah, if there are any reformers in North Korea, they have to stay quiet just out of self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And I doubt there's any true reformers. If there are reformers, they're going to be like Romanian reformers. I don't know if you know this about Romania, but the Communist Party in Romania never actually disbanded itself. It basically just changed its name, and they were actually able to stay in power after the end of the Cold War and after the communist government there gave up its monopoly on power. And that kind of lateral change is not unusual, but that's the kind of change that elites in North Korea might go for if they think that they're in danger of losing their privileges.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not, in that case, a lateral move does not really involve giving up privileges. It just kind of means relabeling the party, relabeling the system of government, while still retaining privileged access to the apparatus of state and the exercise of power in the country. Mm-hmm. That could be interpreted as a revolution, as it was in Romania, but it's kind of a revolution in name only in that case. So that's kind of a third type of revolution, in addition to the other two I mentioned, that could possibly change things in North Korea. But it's all going to depend on elites. That's mostly on them. Unless there's a collapse in state authority for economic reasons or maybe a natural disaster or something. Other than that, it's certainly going to be driven by endogenous political factors.
Yeah. Also, I guess one of the questions is, how stable is the family dynasty? Are they going to continue to control stuff, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really not clear. It's hard to say, because that is something that they're especially opaque about. Mm-hmm. The North Korean government does not feel compelled to share information on that count. The last thing I read that was relevant to that question is that Kim Jong-un is apparently grooming his daughter to succeed him. And his daughter is pretty young. She's only 14, 15 years old or something. But she has started popping up in more state media stuff, more pictures, videos, etc. So it seems like she's kind of getting prepped to move into that role eventually, which would be, it would be wild. North Korea has never had a female leader before. Mm-hmm. And despite being communist, the political culture in North Korea is very, very conservative, especially in terms of social issues. So women are not really all that respected. If you've ever heard about the sex slave markets in North Korea, you know how true that is. So, maybe that works out, but I have a sneaking suspicion that if Kim Jong-un gets older and actually does try to pass the reins on to his daughter, he may actually find significant institutional opposition to that just because she's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that opposition may be genuine. It may be people just genuinely don't like the idea of the inferior gender running North Korea. But it could also be a lot of people pretending to take issue with it because they want more power for themselves. Mm. That's another example of elite tensions resulting in intra-elite violence and potentially regime change. If people spot an issue that people are genuinely upset about, that they themselves don't care about, they may pretend to care about it just to mobilize the people who do care about it in pursuit of their own political objectives. Mm. So insomuch as there is significant opposition to a female leader of North Korea, there hypothetically could be a schism between the elites that emerges over that in the future, a kind of succession crisis of the style that you would not have been out of place in 18th century Europe. The Emperor of Austria in the mid 1700s died, and his successor was a woman. He went out of his way to make sure that his daughter was a successor, by the way. He had to change a bunch of relevant laws in order to make it happen. So that's how committed he was to ensuring that the reins were given to her. Her name was Maria Theresa. And when she entered office, when she became the leader of Austria, she was very quickly challenged by Frederick the Great, the leader of Prussia at the time. They had outstanding territorial disputes, and Frederick the Great was obviously an expansionist. That was kind of his thing. And part of his thinking, in addition to having these outstanding territorial disputes and being expansionist, the fact that she was a woman was also a factor. Like, Frederick the Great genuinely thought that because she was a woman, that she would be easy prey, that, he could probably pretty readily win a war against a woman-led Austria. And so, that wasn't the decisive factor, but that it did weigh on his calculations. So that is the kind of difficulty that you as a woman can encounter in a sort of patriarchal traditional society if you do manage to somehow come into power. You may find significant institutional opposition that makes your life very difficult. So in addition to all of the normal difficulties of leadership, you'll have additional difficulties of basically having to fend off a multitude of rebellions on many fronts.
Yeah, well, I think part of it comes down to I don't know if it's traditional conditioning or just animal instinct behavior. Men tend to show off with aggression more often than women do, at least physical aggression. If what I've heard from talking to women has any bearing, women definitely have their power plays they make at each other for sure, especially when it comes to who has better standing in the group and stuff, and who's included in things and who's not included in stuff. It's just that men are more like direct with their like physical and verbal aggression more often. So in a sense, I think they expect the leader of a country to also have a very strong front and almost an aggressive front. At least that's how people who are more traditional and conservative would kind of see that, as you want your leader to an extent to be intimidating so that enemies don't want to try to mess with them. That kind of makes sense. But one of the things that we can point out with psychology is that human brains are super smart and very amazing, and our sex differences aren't really what make us good thinkers or good leaders. Like, that's more of our reproductive equipment that we got dealt. And yes, there are some behavioral differences between men and women, but we're slowly peeling back the rule of men being the only ones allowed to vote and having the only rights to own property. Like, it's insane when you think about a lot of countries only gave women the right to vote last century. That's super recent.
Yeah.
In just our historical time scale, but then also, I guess, prehistoric. We lived in smaller tribe sizes, so there wasn't like national voting and shit. But it's pretty crazy that that's still in the works. One of the things that Trisha is really passionate about is animal rights, and that's like what I would consider one of the next steps of, okay, if we can give rights to all humans, then who would we consider like trying to improve their situation, or how could we treat certain creatures better so we inflict less blood and pain on the planet? It's kind of an assessment. But yeah, women's rights is definitely one that's been fought for a long time, but certain countries are further ahead than others. And you're saying here that North Korea is relatively far behind when it comes to granting women's rights.
Yeah. Unfortunately so. The government pretends to be progressive in that regard, but, if you actually look at what they do, not so much. The conservative social norms are definitely still paramount.
Mm-hmm. Well, best of luck to the people of North Korea. I hope good changes happen. It's a pretty gross system over there. Throwing it off will be nice, but as we've noticed with other situations where there's bad stuff going on, sometimes when you throw that off, there's a power vacuum and then more bad stuff shows up. See ISIS, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think over larger time scales, we'll figure it out. They just need to be allowed to watch K-drama. Do that as an olive branch. All right, citizens, you're allowed to watch K-dramas. I feel like they would just see those people's lives and envy them too much. Like, that's one of the things, is when you can peer on the other side of the curtain, you see in South Korea, like, they have their problems too, of course, but it is a very beauty conscious culture, and one that also has really good technology, very high level of education relative to countries in the world. So they're doing pretty well, and that's right next door. And they're all Korean people, so it's kind of like, don't look over at their room. It's way better than yours.
Yeah, that's why it's banned. That's why the government's so paranoid about it. It is a alternate version of Korea, a different vision for what Korean society could be. And even with its flaws, a lot of people in North Korea see that and are envious. You know, it's a totally different world. It's like being able to see into a parallel universe.
When I watched the documentary I saw in North Korea, it was the Vice Guide. It was like watching a movie from 1960 or like 1980, because all of their tech was really old and all of their phones were really old. So it was almost like you were watching people from a different decade. So weird. Yeah, South Korea is very current. Like, obviously they're the kings and queens of esports with a lot of different video games and stuff. Like, they're up there and they're with it in terms of developing just their economy and society and what have you. Oh, I did want to also check in about Israel, because that's one of those hot button things, and I'll be honest, I didn't really do research on this, so but I did see people saying stuff like Israel did something and it was too heavy-handed. Maybe that's just a silly headline that I saw passing me, but I don't know if they actually did whatever their reprisal move was going to be.
Probably. I mean, it's a tribal conflict at its base. And so the violence is akin to what you would see in tribal conflicts in places like Africa. So yeah, most likely there has been heavy-handed violence targeting Palestinians, you know, to one degree or another. They deny it. They say that, you know, we're targeting the terrorists, Hamas. They're embedded amongst the civilian infrastructure, so there's invariably going to be collateral damage. That's true. I think what the Israelis are doing is not targeting civilian targets. I think what they've done is that they've significantly loosened rules of engagement so that they can get targets of opportunity almost regardless of circumstances. You know, they still do the rooftop knocking and all that jazz, but I suspect that there's quite a bit of targets that are getting cleared now since the conflict has started in October that would not have been cleared beforehand.
Sorry, what is rooftop knocking?
Basically, the idea is when the Israelis want to blow up a building or want to try to kill somebody in a building, they'll actually in the case of rooftop knocking, what they'll do is that they'll actually set off a small explosive on the top of the building. And that's supposed to be a warning to the people in the building that they need to get out, and that the next one is going to be the real one. They also call people in the building and ask them to warn other people living in the building to evacuate. They've been known to do that as well. So that's been the norm for many years. It's still the norm. They still do that, though it's debatable the extent to which they're still doing it in every case. Again, I suspect that when they find targets of opportunity, they probably just go for it now to a much more frequently than they used to.
It seems a little bit counterproductive if you're willing to use violent force, but you're letting them know that you're about to use violent force. By the way, we are going to attack you very soon.
Yeah, I mean, the Israelis are not lying when they say that they care about collateral damage. You know, they do have policies in place to try to mitigate that.
I respect that. That's great. It just seems like, what about the person that you're trying to get? Like, how do you not give them the information? Like, hey, you should leave the building. It's like, hey, everyone, leave the building. It's like everyone leaves the building, and now you just destroyed a building.
In some cases, what they'll do is they'll get them elsewhere. Sometimes, though, the building that they're going after they're not targeting it because they want to kill somebody specific within it. Sometimes they're targeting facilities, maybe not facilities. Sometimes they're targeting equipment within the building. For example, it's not uncommon for Hamas to have workshops in which they build, say, rockets or some other equipment related to their military activity.
Gotcha. You're hitting strategic locations.
Yeah. In that case, you're going after the workshops or whatever, or maybe a command and control center or whatever, something. And they've got little facilities like that located, just kind of scattered throughout Gaza, located here and there. Again, they design it specifically to be hard to target, right? It's distributed so that there's no one place that the Israelis can hit and then just cripple them as an organization. So the Israelis say that they're using human shields. Of course, Hamas says that we're just doing what comes naturally for an organization that's trying to survive against a far more powerful opponent. They're both right. Both of those things are true, right? They are technically hiding amongst the civilian population. But Hamas is correct that, that is necessary for them to survive as an effective organization. Otherwise, the Israelis would just pick them apart readily. So if the choice is between fighting fair and dying, and not fighting fair and surviving, obviously resistance groups, rebel groups, what have you, are going to go with the latter over the former.
You go with what wins, not what is the most formal rule of engagement.
Yeah, so it's not surprising. Regardless of all of these measures that Israel takes to try to mitigate collateral damage, like there is significant collateral damage, obviously, especially in the present conflict. And I think people would probably be okay with that if there was any kind of strategy that seemed to be in place, but it's not really clear what the Israeli government is going for here.
What is their win condition?
Yeah, like how does this end? Like, the Israeli government talks in very absolutist terms about destroying Hamas and transforming governance in Gaza and trying to build up Gaza so that people don't hate Israel. And it all sounds very detached from reality to me. Like, you're not doing any of those things. Like, what are you talking about? There's just no clear pathway between what they're talking about, what they want to do, and what they're actually doing right now. So, for now, it really just seems to me like it's just revenge killings for October. Like, they're trying to kill people who are members of Hamas. And they're going to keep doing it until some kind of threshold is built. I don't know, until the United States tells them to stop or international pressure builds to a crescendo. Something. There's obviously some kind of condition that will be reached eventually by which they'll stop. But I have no idea what that would be. I don't even know if they know. I don't know if the Israeli government really knows what its exit strategy is here. I think, really, honestly, I think a lot of the impetus behind the current operation was really more political than strategic. The Netanyahu government was embarrassed. They needed to do something to compensate for it, for the embarrassment of, having overseen the government when this attack happened in October. And so they decided to respond disproportionately, not only to try to restore deterrence, which would be the strategic move, but more importantly for the government to try to restore their credibility with Israeli voters, which was already kind of in question. Obviously, Israeli politics was very divided and has been for some time. So, given that the war started more, in my opinion, for political reasons than strategic reasons, I think Israel is on a pretty dark path right now, because the United States has considerable history with wars that started more for political reasons than strategic reasons, and they do not end well. Vietnam and Afghanistan being the principal cases in point, if not also Iraq. We won all of the battles in all of those wars, and we still lost. So I don't really see Israel performing any better in that regard. If somebody wants to convince me otherwise, by all means. Clearly I'm missing something, if there is, in fact, some kind of pathway to victory here that the Israeli government has in mind. I saw somebody in chat mention at one point, a couple of weeks ago, that the real plan was just to try to degrade Hamas's capacity to commit violence, right? To degrade their capabilities. That makes sense. I could see that. But that's not what the Israeli government is talking about right now. And it's not clear to me just how much degradation is going to be enough for the Israeli government, or for that matter, for right-wing Israeli voters. who are very much in the mood to pay for blood right now. You can see as much in the West Bank right now, where there's considerable communal violence happening. So, I mean, in terms of new things to report, I don't really have much. Like, mostly it's just ongoing violence. There's not much new to report in that regard. Let's see, I did have some notes. There was a ceasefire a couple of months ago. 50 hostages were released in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners. All of these were released in tranches, so that happened, but then they failed to renew the ceasefire, and so then fighting resumed, within like a week or two. Mind you, that was last year, I think like November, December, and the fighting has been pretty much ongoing since then. There was a Hamas leader assassinated in Lebanon, so there was some question about whether that might escalate things with Hezbollah. It did not, so no surprise that Israel is going to assassinate Hamas leadership. That was pretty much expected from the start. As far as mitigating civilian casualties, in addition to the rooftop knocking thing, at first they told people just to leave the northern half of Gaza, because they focused their early military operations there. Since then, they've finished in northern Gaza for the most part, and they've started working more on southern Gaza, but obviously people don't really have anywhere to go at that point, other than to go back into northern Gaza, which has been devastated. So what they're doing now, or at least what they had been doing the last time I read about it, they'll designate safe zones. And what they'll do is they'll tell people when they're about to start operations in a given area that the people in that area should go to a given safe zone until the operation is complete. So that's been how they've been trying to manage, or at least mitigate, some of the collateral damage in that regard. They have not talked, individual radicals within Israeli politics have talked about expelling Palestinians, but obviously Egypt and other countries in the region are not willing to do that. Not just because they don't want, a shit ton of refugees, but also because they're opposed to it, because they see it as an explicit land grab on the part of the Israeli government, if they did do that. So that's not likely in the cards. I think that is hyperventilating. I think when people complain about that, they're hyperventilating. That's not really a real thing that the Israeli government is likely to do. They did say recently that they're going to start targeting Rafah, which is the main border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, where a lot of foreign aid has been coming in. So that has some people worried that humanitarian conditions may get even worse, given that it'll be much more difficult to get food and other supplies into the territory without Rafah. And the United States government, for his part, came out and said that it wanted to discourage the Israeli government from attacking Rafah because there would be a humanitarian disaster. I always find it hilarious when the United States, since this conflict has begun, has tried to intercede and restrain Israel, because the government response from the Israeli government has invariably basically been to tell us to go fuck ourselves. Like, they just say, no, we're not going to do that. I remember a couple weeks ago, Sullivan, the Secretary of State for the United States, came out with a peace plan that he was trying to push with the Israeli government. And the Israeli government literally just said, no, we're not doing that. So the United States is having a hell of a time right now, kind of asserting its authority in the Palestine-Israel conflict. Neither party is really that interested in talks right now. Let's see. So Israeli operations largely have been focused on 1, killing senior Hamas officials, 2, destroying machinery, usually machinery involved in the production of rockets or other weapons, and then 3, destroying tunnels, which Hamas has been using to smuggle various resources into and out of Gaza. So that's sort of the main gist of Israeli operations right now. I would point out again that these are basically tactics in search of a strategy, since there still doesn't seem to be an overarching plan. But at least in terms of specific military operations, that's what they're doing. Overarching strategy, in so much as it's been defined, involves destroying Hamas somehow, some kind of indefinite de facto military control of Gaza, a kind of martial law, which would, of course, involve the Israeli military. That's not going to work, but that is something the Israeli government has come out and said is part of their strategy to deal with the problem. Also, direct control over the Rafah border crossing, again by the Israeli government. That's more doable. Regional coalition that includes the United States to curtail smuggling and tunnels under Gaza. Good luck finding takers for that. Also, prolonged conflict. The Israeli government has signaled that it is committed to continue with this conflict for, quote unquote, as long as it takes. And they've made moves to suggest that they're willing to fight all the way through 2024, up to and including rotating out these tired units that have been fighting for several months now to give them time to rest. That actually reduces the number of the amount of forces that they have in theater. But as they rest units, they're going to be able to deploy them more sustainably in future instead of just dumping them all in at once, like they did at the beginning of the offensive. Let's see, they've also talked a bit about governance in Gaza. They've said that they want the entity in control of the territory, whatever that may be, to build on this is a quote, will build on the capabilities of the existing administrative mechanism, civil committees in Gaza, specifically local non-hostile actors, end quote. So that's kind of a word salad. There are local governance in Gaza is defined by civil committees, but saying that you're going to build some kind of new provincial governance that builds on their capacities, builds on the capacities of civil committees is very, very vague. Like that could mean anything. So I'm not really sure that that's supposed to be clear, or if the Israeli government itself is even clear on just what that's supposed to mean. There was one media report that suggested that all appointments to local committees would have to be approved by Israel. That's obviously going to be a non-starter. That's an extremely intrusive move, and that would immediately delegitimize the local committees and would invite inevitable shadow governance by hidden underground local committees that would basically just usurp whatever kind of official authority would be set up in that vein. It's also worth pointing out that the Israeli government has no role at this time envisioned for the Palestinian Authority for future governance in Gaza, which is itself very telling. That's yet another signal, very clear-cut signal, that the Likud party and the Netanyahu government in particular is not really committed at all to a two-state solution. It would make a lot of sense to try to get the PA in charge of Gaza, but that's a step towards a two-state solution, and Netanyahu is not going to abide that. So that's not on the table at all right now. Also, to continue here, the last point I had about Israeli strategy vis-a-vis Gaza is that they've mentioned an international coalition to rebuild Gaza. Good luck finding takers for that, because there's been so many coalitions to rebuild Gaza so many times now that there's a certain amount of fatigue in the region in particular, if not in the wider world, to continue rebuilding the territory that Israel is just going to blow up again later.
Yeah, so the rebuilding doesn't work because it just gets blown up again?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's not a lot of interest in continuing this sort of tit-for-tat game where everybody pretends that, this is totally going to be the time we rebuild it for the last time and build a functioning economy that mitigates violence. It's not. And there's not that much interest correspondingly, which is invariably going to make radicalization worse in Gaza. So Israel isn't really doing itself any favors in that regard either. But nominally, this is the stuff I have written down as far as what I've been able to infer about Israeli strategy so far. And again, like there's a lot of magical thinking here, like a lot of wishful thinking about what's possible. Like none of this really seems to be based in reality. Other than, direct control of the Rafah border crossing, there's not a lot of details here that I think are, one, doable, or two, realistic. Which again makes me question like just what the actual plan is here, or if indeed there even is one.
Mm-hmm. Other than maybe the other side will stop being violent.
Yeah, good luck with that.
And they'll give up. Yeah.
We're totally going to win. We're going to be so committed that our threats will be so credible that the other side will just lose hope and quit.
I'm about to issue the most credible threat ever. Uh-oh.
Yeah, just crush their spirit. It'll totally work, guys. Yeah, so there is talk about, Israel targeting hospitals or maybe targeting targets that are too close to hospitals. I haven't been following it too closely. It doesn't really matter. I mean, neither party is really trustworthy. Like the Israeli government and Hamas have long-standing records of obfuscating the truth about what goes on in these kinds of military operations. So the truth is invariably going to be difficult to infer, regardless of which side you support here. And given the scale of the violence, I don't doubt that invariably, whether intended or not, there's a lot of civilian casualties. And there probably has been damage done to hospitals, or perhaps there are Hamas facilities within hospitals that have been targeted. That would not surprise me either. Regardless, though, talking about the conflict in terms of who's suffering the most is kind of a form of misdirection, because it ignores the fact that, again, as I've said repeatedly on here, the factions within both sides that most want violence and most want to fight over the land are the ones in charge of their respective sides. And when that's the case, violence is inevitable. Like, they're going to fight. People are going to suffer. People are going to die. This is the desired outcome. This is the trade-off they wanted to make in exchange to pursue other objectives. So that being the case, like, none of this is surprising. None of this should shock anybody. Like, this is the norm when you get violent actors like this in charge. It would be much better if the moderates, both among the Palestinians and the Israelis, could get into power and just negotiate with each other and ignore everybody else. But they can't do that. In the few times where that's happened, the radical parties within Israel and among the Palestinians have sabotaged those talks. Right? Oslo Accords, peace agreement negotiated, put them on a pathway to the Camp David Accords. The whole way through, both Likud and Hamas, as well as affiliated factions in both Israeli and Palestinian politics, said that they disagreed that an agreement was feasible, hated the agreement that was eventually reached, and actively promised and did undermine the Oslo Agreement and the subsequent Camp David Accords.
Oh, no.
And of course, when they failed, they said that the failure was inevitable, and they leveraged subsequent violence into electoral victory, and now they're both in charge. And, surprise, they're killing each other. Who could have seen that coming?
Well, based on what you're saying, probably a lot of people. But one thing...
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, one thing for me, I feel like media and news about the Israel-Palestine conflict has been served to us at different times, but like you're saying, there's always been a resting level of violence there. It's just that, like, the October 6th or whatever day it was, like, that was a major blow that was dealt and something that was really bad that happened. But it's sort of like this is an illness that's been here for a long time, so it's not really new information. It's just a spike of the existing tensions. But the fundamental here is that you're seeing each other as very different people with very different goals, and that makes it really hard to compromise on a shared solution, because you don't want to give your enemy power and a foothold in your country. And that's the thing, is they perceive each other as the enemy. So yeah, the two-state solution, it seems like in theory it could work, but the parties, like you're saying, that have the most power are the ones that are the most aggressive. Like, people would basically need to show that they want to vote in less aggressive people, or at least try to create less aggressive institutions and so on, that are more looking for opportunities to, like, have shared benefit projects. I don't even know what that would be. Kind of like you're saying, they need a plan of some kind, of a set of good reasons why we should lay down our arms and just have normal civil society together. But there's so much bloodshed that's, like, been tallied for the families that have lived over there that you can kind of empathize at the same time of, I can see why they're so mad at the other side, because people who live there likely have multiple life experiences of, okay, I know this person who was killed by this strike, kind of a thing. So it's a very heavy issue, and the tensions have basically been hot for thousands of years, I guess.
Yeah, there's been significant ongoing intermittent violence, for sure. And just how you get from that to some kind of stable equilibria is not clear. I think one of the problems is that even if you reached a peace agreement, there would still be violence. Invariably, radicals would still commit intermittent acts of violence. Invariably, there would be religious fanatics in Israel who would want to settle the land and would try to, regardless of whether the Israeli government wanted to. So, I mean, when you have people like that involved, even a stable equilibrium is going to involve some kind of baseline level of instability and violence. And I think that's a major barrier for obvious reasons. For one, because it undermines any attempt at actual peace, but it's also a problem because it makes it very difficult to credibly commit to peace, right? If you know that that's going to happen. Well, I mean, more specifically, let me put it like this. How do you sell that to people in either Israel or Palestine? Like if you say, hey, we can get a peace agreement, but it's going to involve probably a couple dozen, maybe 100 or so people dying over the course of maybe every couple of years in intermittent violence forever. That's not, yeah,
Sounds
it's
kind of
not
rough.
very attractive. Yeah, that's not great. That's not the best selling point. You know, what people want is a comprehensive peace deal that involves minimal or no violence. The idea that you would have a comprehensive peace deal that involves a marginally lower level of baseline violence than what we have now, that's a harder sell. But that's also probably the most realistic possibility. So, in so much as people are not satisfied with that and want more, that represents a big gap between what's possible and what is desired. And, you know, as with any political issue where that's the case, it's a very difficult thing to close that gap because people are going to vote for what they want, not necessarily for what's possible. And you can definitely see that in Palestine and Israel. You know, it really doesn't matter that they're in this sort of tribal conflict over land that has been going on for decades and has no clear end in sight. Clearly, you know, major concessions would be required to end it. But people don't like that. You know, people would prefer for the maximalist solution. People would prefer right of return, or, you know, Israel from the river to the sea, you know, settling and colonizing the West Bank, or Judea and Sumeria, as they prefer to call it. So, you know, when those are your positions, what can you do, right? I mean, if you are a politician, you kind of have to respect the will of the people. Even if you're not really an elected politician like Mahmoud Abbas, you know, over in the Palestinian Authority, like even they cater to that sentiment in order to try to maintain some semblance of legitimacy. So, you know, it's kind of like the populist problem in the West right now. Like when you have populists in power who do and say things that are popular, but promise things that they almost literally cannot deliver on. Like, what do you do? How do you close the gap between people who want to vote for things that they want, but can never have, and things that they could have, but are not that popular? Like, we have not solved that puzzle here. And if we haven't solved it here, you know, in the United States or in Europe, where the world's wealthiest, most established democracies are, it's probably not going to get solved in Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, it'll take some stages of development and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless there's some kind of grand enlightenment, which elevates the whole debate between Palestinians and Israelis at some point. Most likely, the immovable object and the unstoppable force are just going to continue to crash into each other until some structural variable in that conflict changes in favor of one or the other. What that would look like, I don't know. You know, maybe demographics change decisively in the Arabs' favor. Maybe the Arabs are able or, you know, willing to finally just solve the conflict decisively by expelling the population or putting them in, you know, actual ghettos. Or maybe some other solution. Like, who knows? It could go any number of ways. But regardless, like, the status quo is the status quo, and it's going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. Like, there's no reason to expect anything but what we're seeing right now, which is one of the reasons that I don't really pay that much attention to it. Like, Israel-Palestine bloodletting is just sort of on the calendar at this point. You know, it's something that you just expect every 1 or 2 years or so. And then it generally flames out after a month or two. This particular flare-up is lasting way longer than I would have expected. I thought it would be a couple months. And it looks like it's going to last potentially 6 months to a year, if not longer. But even though this is unusual in the length of the fighting, I don't expect it to have any significant income on the trajectory of the conflict as a whole. You know, most likely it is just going to return to status quo at some point.
Well, shit. Status quo, then.
Oh, would you like some fun numbers?
Sure.
All right. So I got this from an article from The Economist. So I'll quote from the article. A survey published in December by the leading Palestinian pollster found that 72% of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza thought Hamas was correct to attack Israel on October the 7th, despite the horrific consequences. In a poll by the Israel Democracy Institute, a nonpartisan think tank, 52% of Israeli Jews said their country should not pursue a two-state solution after the war.
You said 70% of the attacks were a good thing?
72% of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza thought Hamas was correct to attack Israel on October 7th. So the going public in both territories involved, both Israel and Palestine, neither of them are particularly interested in concessions right now.
Yeah.
They really weren't before, but they're especially not right now. So I'm not particularly optimistic about the conflict at this point, even less so than I was before, and I was already very cynical about it.
Well, best of luck to them. Hope things turn around in some way.
Somehow, yeah, that's that's the operative word. Good luck with that, guys. No idea how to fix that mess, but good luck to you. Well, I'm sure chat is enjoying that. I don't doubt that it's engaging in its usual Israel-Palestine debate.
There are a lot of new people here tonight. We have a lot of new Stormgate viewers. Maybe a reintroduction is in order because we've tripled our viewer count since we started this. This is World Discussion with my friend Agent Smith, and we talk about world history, foreign policy, economics, current events, that kind of thing. And yes, that is one of the hottest button issues that is being served to us in the current time. So sorry, it's a bit stressful, chat. We're not always talking about stressful Israel-Palestine stuff, but we do talk about conflicts and that kind of thing. So it can get a little bit heavy now and then, but chat's been relatively well behaved from what I've seen.
Yeah, world affairs has been unusually violent for the past couple of years, so we've been talking more about the violent stuff since 2022 or so. Generally more public policy stuff and foreign policy stuff, not so much violence per se.
Mm-hmm.
But violence is in vogue in the 2020s, so that's what we're talking about.
Yep. Peace is out, murder is in.
Yeah, unfortunately so. Now, I don't read chat, but occasionally I do sneak a peek. Sometimes it's just kind of in front of me. And so, for one, hello to Fuzzy Cord. Thank you for modding. You've been here a very long time. I did notice that he said that I didn't see the context behind why he said it, but he mentioned that Egypt had made peace with Israel. Technically, it was the Egyptian military that made peace with Israel. Yes, they are the Egyptian government, but keep in mind, governments in the Middle East are not particularly legitimate. And so peace agreements that Israel signs with these governments are really peace agreements signed with the elites of these societies. And so peace between Israel and those societies is very much dependent on the stability and maintenance of those various regimes that it signs those agreements with. If there were to be a revolution that would undermine those states, all bets are off. It could be that a new government continues to recognize those agreements, but maybe not. That was one of the big questions back in the Arab Spring. It wasn't entirely clear that an Egypt run by the Muslim Brotherhood would continue to honor the peace agreements that Egypt had signed with Israel, which is one of the reasons that Israel was so upset with the United States for not coming out explicitly against the revolution and helping the Egyptian military stay in power. They were not very comfortable with that approach to the problem. Yeah, that's one of the reasons not to be too optimistic about the fact that Israel is signing more peace agreements with countries in the region. It's true that the Abraham Accords have expanded and cemented normalization of ties between Israel and a number of states in the region. And obviously, Israel already had peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan, which were major achievements in the region as far as peace. But you know that those achievements always come with that asterisk. Like those agreements are very much dependent on the continued existence of authoritarian states in the Arab world. It is very much not clear what would happen to those agreements, or to Israel for that matter, if there were to be revolutionary change. If you want an example of what that could look like, look no further than Iran. The Iranian government used to be very pro-Israel, used to be the biggest friend Israel had in the region during the early part of the Cold War, up through the 50s, 60s, and 70s until the Iranian Revolution. Then there was a kind of sort of democratic revolution that ended up becoming very authoritarian, and the new revolutionary government not so friendly with Israel. Obviously, the Islamic Republic of Iran now is basically Israel's number one threat in the region. So if there were to be an Iranian-style revolution in every country in the region, Israel would be in a very, very difficult position. So peace agreements are great, definitely do that. Normalize relations as much as possible, lower the temperature as much as possible in the region. But at the same time, just keep in mind, Israel is to a degree living on borrowed time in the region, in so much as the states in the region themselves are living on borrowed time.
And by lower the temperature, you don't mean climate-wise, you mean like tensions between the factions involved. Just clarifying.
Yeah.
Some people are like, we just need to open our fridges at the same time.
Encouraging government to government ties, people to people ties, just informal ties, travel, economic ties, all of those kinds of things makes people, it keeps people in contact with each other and gets them more familiar with each other. The more exposure Israelis and Arabs have with each other, the closer their bonds and the less reason they have to fight. That doesn't change the underlying calculus of the conflict. It doesn't change, the de facto settler colonialism in the West Bank. It doesn't change the fact that violent nationalist extremists are not entirely accepting of the fact that Israel even exists at all. All of that is still true, but in general, it's less of a problem relatively if you do take steps to encourage ties, exposure, etc. The more interdependence, the better off the region will be.
By exposure, do you mean like cooperation or like nudity?
Well, I guess they're not mutually exclusive, for one. But yeah, just any kind of people-to-people ties, just people getting to know each other, talk to each other. One of the ways you deal with prejudice is just getting people to know each other on an individual basis rather than by way of propaganda or incendiary media or what have you. Intermediaries have an agenda, but if you remove the informational middleman, you can improve the quality of perceptions that people have of each other. And while they can still end up in conflict, when there are fundamental underlying differences, it's less likely that those conflicts will be dramatic, or as dramatic anyway, as if their relations were defined by traditional media intermediaries.
We hit a very heavy couple topics with Ukraine and Israel. Were there any silly, stupid things that happened this week?
Stupid things, yes. I don't know that they would be silly per se.
Okay, silly. Oh, stupid but not silly. Got it.
Let's see. I never talked about the Chinese guy in Colorado. Okay. So this is a weird one. So what happened is that this guy disappeared. And there were stories in U.S. media about him disappearing, and people wondered, well, what happened to him? And eventually his family came out and said that he'd actually been kidnapped and that he was being held ransom. And so then it got to be an even bigger story because, a Chinese guy getting kidnapped and held for ransom in the United States is big news. That's very weird. It's not even all that usual for it to happen for, just citizens here. So the police got involved, they looked into it, and they found out that he was camping.
Okay, he's very good at camouflaging his camp.
Yeah, he went camping, so that's why he was missing. But there's more to the story, because it turns out that he was not camping voluntarily. What had happened is that a criminal group had gotten a hold of his information and actually extorted him into disappearing. They made him go camping specifically so that he would disappear.
Go take a walk. No, really.
Yeah.
Go camping.
Yeah. So when he disappeared, that same group got in contact with his family and said that the reason that they couldn't contact him was because that he had been kidnapped and that they needed to pay them a ransom, which they then paid. So the whole thing was actually fake. It was all just a big extortion scam.
Wow, they didn't actually kidnap him, but they convinced his family that they did, and he was simply in the woods.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah, it was kind of a mind fuck.
That's awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, so the whole thing was basically just done by phone. Like, the criminal group didn't have to actually send anybody to deal with any of the people involved.
Oh my God.
Yeah, scammers in China don't fuck around. They're actually pretty smart. That actually ties into Burma. You remember the civil war in Burma, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you remember that big offensive we talked about in the northern part of Burma a couple months ago? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the reasons that offensive happened, this is stuff that we found out in the past month or two. This was not information that was available early on in the offensive. So it turns out the offensive was not just ethnic militias in the northern part of Burma teaming up to try to kick the government out of the territory. There was actually more to the story. Because there was a town in the middle of one of the provinces in that northern region that was known for being a center of Chinese call scammers. Basically, there was a city there, like a small city, where the main economic activity was running scam call centers, scamming Chinese people.
Scam City, that's awesome.
Yeah. And there was about, maybe a couple families that basically just ran the city as their fiefdom and competed with each other for power within it.
Our scams are way better than your scams. Your scams are like little baby scams. We're scamming people over the phone out of all of their money without even kidnapping them.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's pretty much what it came down to. It was kind of a Wild West thing, because obviously, even before the Civil War in Burma, like the frontier territories and where the ethnic militias dominate are kind of Wild West territory. Like, rule of law is pretty weak there. And the ethnic militias themselves are very frequently involved in criminal activity, for example, like drug smuggling, in order to generate revenue for their militias and for their local governments. Now, they kind of had a relationship with the scammers in the city. They kind of had a symbiotic relationship where, money changed hands and they tolerated each other's existence. But the Chinese government was not particularly happy with the arrangement for obvious reasons. And for a long time, they didn't really care too much. It was kind of a small-time thing. And occasionally, they would lean on the Burma government to try to do something about it. But the Burmese government didn't really have a lot of authority in the northern part of the state, and they had priorities elsewhere that were generally more important. So really, nothing ended up getting done for a very long time. But over the course of the pandemic, the call scam thing got way, way bad. Like, a lot of criminals just lost their main revenue, and so they ended up doubling down on telecommunications stuff like call scams. And the result is that this town, and their activity just ballooned, and the revenue just skyrocketed. And correspondingly, the number of people getting scammed in China, as well as Chinese abroad, skyrocketed in turn. And it actually got even worse than that, because what they started doing is that they started putting ads, and they started putting out job ads, advertising jobs in Southeast Asia. Like tech worker, computer scientist, whatever. And they would hire these people, and when they came down, they would kidnap them and force them into the scam town in Burma and force them to work in the call centers using their computer skills. And there was actually a lot of people that were victimized like that at an increasing rate. Again, that all came out of the pandemic, but it never really got better afterwards. And so the Chinese government, a couple months ago, finally said, hey, the Burma government is obviously not going to do shit about this. And the problem posed by these scammers is reaching critical mass. So what we're going to do is we're going to give the green light to some of these local militias to go and just overrun this town. Because they could have done that before, but that, one, they were making money out of it, and two, there were Chinese nationals there. And nobody really wants to fuck with Chinese nationals too much in Burma for fear that the Chinese government may do something. But in this case, Beijing said, fuck these people, you can do what you want. Just get rid of them. We're sick of this. And so when they did, the local militia said, hey, fucking hey, more money for us. And so they all banded together, launched the offensive, kicked the government out, but more to the point, they took over the city and kicked the Chinese scammers out. So that was the true genesis of that offensive. It was not really about banding together to fight the national government per se, although that was one of their objectives. The main objective was actually going after this town, partly at behest of the Chinese government, which actually does have ties to a couple of these local militias, generally informal ties, and generally it's more about trying to maintain a baseline level of security along the Chinese border, which of course the Chinese government cares a lot about. But still, the fact that they were able to get the green light was what really changed the dynamic there. And led to the offensive.
Can someone make a movie real quick that's a bunch of suburban people with hockey sticks and brooms that are going to take the war to the scam call center? Someone needs to make this a movie. It's too silly. Those scammers have hassled us enough. We're taking justice in our own hands and fighting them in their own scam city. Could be good.
That's what they did, only instead of brooms, they used AK-47s.
Yikes. Okay.
More effective.
Yeah.
Let's see. So that's kind of a weird story. I don't know how silly it is, but certainly a weird one. There was an Indiana fisherman. He was just killing time, looking for a place to fish. And he found a truck crashed under a bridge with a body inside.
Was he able to fish it up, or is it too heavy?
Probably too heavy for him.
That makes sense.
But he did investigate the crash, and when he moved the airbag out of the way in front of the body, he realized that the body was actually still alive.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And so once they were able to retrieve this guy and get his story, it turned out that he had crashed and been stuck in his truck under the bridge for 6 days. And he had been surviving off of rainwater, apparently.
Wow.
He had tried yelling for help, but nobody could hear him because he was, way under the bridge.
Yeah.
And he actually had, before they found him, he had actually already given up and assumed he was going to die. So he got extraordinarily lucky. Again, sheer chance that a random fisherman just happened to find him.
I'm glad he lived, though. Hell yeah.
Yeah, he got pretty lucky. So, yeah, there's another weird story for you. Let's see. Oh, God. How much time do we have?
About 15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
So did you hear the story about the threesome in Florida?
Isn't that like a pretty common thing, or was there like a particular one?
No, there's a particular one.
Okay.
You would have remembered if you heard about this. This was a very entertaining one. This definitely made the rounds on Reddit. Some people in chat probably immediately know what I'm talking about. So here are the people involved here. One of them is the chair of the Florida Republican Party, a guy named Christian Ziegler. Another party involved is his wife, who is the co-founder of Moms for Liberty, a non-government organization committed to the pursuit of various conservative objectives in American society and politics.
Yeah, conservative objectives such as orgies.
Such as orgies. She also sits on the Sarasota County School Board, and her name is Bridget Ziegler. And the third party is Jane Doe. We don't know her name. But she was the third corner of the triangle involved here. So what had happened is that in 2022, they had all had a threesome together. Not clear if it was the first one, but it happened. We know it happened because they taped it.
Oh.
And guess what came out? The tape came out. So, normally a tape of people voluntarily having a threesome is not a big deal. It'll end up in the amateur section of some website, and then people will never think about it, right? But in this case, because the people involved were, in fact, politicians or activists, in the case of Bridget Ziegler, it came to be a thing. And a lot of people were kind of upset about these people who proclaim their interest in maintaining American morality, engaging in something that is perhaps not really in keeping with traditional American morality, depending on who you talk to. So when this kind of got big, it later came out that there was more to the story. More to the story is kind of our theme tonight. So what happened is that Christian Ziegler, again, chair of the Florida Republican Party, apparently invited Jane Doe to another threesome. And so, she was interested. And it turns out that the main reason she was interested was because she was very attracted to Bridget Ziegler, not so much to Christian Ziegler. Now, that became a problem when Jane Doe learned that actually Bridget Ziegler was not coming to the threesome. It was just going to be a one-on-one encounter between herself and Christian Ziegler. That was not of interest to Miss Jane Doe, so she ended up withdrawing from the invitation. Whereupon Christian Ziegler went to her house and insisted upon them having sex, and then allegedly raped her.
Yikes.
Yikes, indeed. So the story was bad enough when it was just a threesome involving these, again, allegedly conservative people. That's not even that big a deal. People have sex, and quite frankly, it doesn't surprise me at all that conservatives do this. Like, I'm very used to that. I grew up in Texas, trust me.
Yeah.
Very common.
Well, one of the things that I heard a statistic of when I was going to church, actually, it was just so funny and awkward. Like, easily one of the most awkward church Sundays that I've been to because of the subject material. And this is my issue, right? I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not the kind of person who's a gambler. I like pretty stuff. So when they were like, 95% of men browse porn, but porn is bad, and it's like looking around the room, 95% of people here, and it's like, oh shit, I feel called out. And yeah, you're conservative, maybe you're religious, whatever, but the urges are there. It's kind of one of those things. But yeah, that was there's some funny site that has the statistics of all the anti-gay legislators in the US and how they have a ridiculously high chance of being in gay relations. Specifically the people who are opposed to that stuff, which is, I don't know if it's like they're trying to, I don't know. It's very contradictory. But yes, human beings are sexual creatures regardless of their political leanings, but they have opinions that they will share with you for sure.
Yeah.
Ooh, Chad is saying taboos are sexy. That may be part of it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But, if the story had just ended with the threesome, no big deal, just some hypocrisy. Again, pretty normal for America. But the sexual assault does kind of push it over the boundary there into something more serious.
For sure.
So that's where the story kind of took on a different tone.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the threesome I was referring to.
Gotcha. I had not heard about that.
Yeah, it was a wild one. It was a pretty wild one. Yeah, that ranks up there with the pandemic story, I remember, which we talked about some years ago, where I think it was a Hungarian member of parliament, and maybe it was a Dutch member of parliament, who was very conservative and known for upholding conservative values in his campaign platform, who was caught jumping out of a window during a raid on a gay orgy during the lockdown in 2020.
Oh, no.
They're not supposed to congregate, and they weren't supposed to congregate in large groups during the pandemic. That was banned in order to try to inhibit the spread of the virus.
Right.
So when the cops found out about the orgy, they raided it. And when this guy found out that he was going to be arrested, out the window he went. He jumped out trying to get away, and he couldn't make it. They still got him. Which just makes it even more embarrassing. So, yeah, he had some political problems after that, I would surmise.
So funny. Chad is saying they think it was in Belgium where that happened.
Oh, was it Belgium? Okay.
Chad is saying, please tell me he jumped out naked.
No, I think he might have been, actually.
The fuck?
Because it's not like they got raided at the beginning of the orgy, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think they had time, after the raid started to get their clothes on.
Yeah, well, it would just be a dinner party. They can just say they weren't doing nothing. We were doing nothing. We had no intentions whatsoever other than polite conversation. Moments later. That's hilarious.
Well, let's see. If you want another weird one, and I guess this is relevant to our theme. We seem to be hitting on the sex tonight. Have you ever heard of a porn star named Whitney Wright?
No.
No, okay. So there's a million of them. I don't blame you. So let's see. She, of course, has been active on social media. You know, that's a principal way to advertise your brand, so to speak, in the industry. But, you know, not unlike other people in the industry, she kind of has sympathies with Palestine. And she's been quite vocal about putting them on her social media profile. So, you know, if you're a porn star in America and you support Palestine, what do you think might be a way to express that support?
I don't know. Have an outfit that has it on it?
Not a bad idea. What about, Neuro? What about traveling to Iran?
What? Oh.
She got a tourist visa to Iran, went there, and she visited the former U.S. embassy, the famous one, where the Iranian revolutionaries seized American hostages and held them for more than 400 days. It's now a museum. She went there, and she said that, you know, if you go to Iran and you just follow the law, you don't have any problems. She also bitched out the Iranian government for not having enough pictures of Palestinian revolutionaries in the museum. And then she left. And then she left. She bitched out the Iranian government, and then she kind of implicitly insulted a lot of the feminist activists in Iran, who, of course, don't believe that if you just follow the law that you won't have any problems. Obviously, the hijab protests were case in point, to say nothing of the fact that the laws are unjust, which, of course, many activists believe. So this woman managed to piss off just everybody by doing this. And also, I might add, confusing the shit out of everybody, because none of this makes any sense. Like, how does a porn star from America, of all places, even get a tourist visa to Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran? When the Iranian government was asked about this, they said they had no idea. We don't know who this person is. We don't know her background. We don't know what's happening.
There was just one agent who got this on their desk of like, do you want to approve this person? And they just like looked it over and they're like, yeah. They stamp it.
Most likely, yeah. And I think later on they eventually did release a statement saying that they had not been aware of her background in the sex industry, which kind of goes without saying.
Is it illegal to make lewd content there?
Punishable by death.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty severe punishment.
Yeah, and she got a tourist visa.
Huh.
Yeah, after it happened, the State Department issued a statement advising citizens not to travel to Iran on account of, you know, the kidnapping, the tensions, the terrorism, you know, that kind of stuff. It's probably not the best idea to go. So, you know, nobody knows what to make of this. Nobody knows why she did it. Nobody knows what she hoped to get out of it. Certainly, her conduct while she was there suggests that she was either totally ignorant of the danger or just didn't give a shit. Either way, I'm kind of impressed, really. It does take a lot of balls for an American porn star to go to Iran and then just to shit talk the government while you're there.
And then walk away.
And then walk away, yeah.
That's true. You could be like captured or something. There's a lot of worse things that could have happened.
Yeah, I really can't decide if she's just really dumb or really badass. That is kind of a power move on her part.
Pretty funny. A CIA agent. They would never suspect it.
You know, you're not supposed to be conspicuous if you're working for the CIA. That's pretty conspicuous.
Yeah, but what if it's like so obvious that it's like, obviously they would never send someone like this.
It's too dumb. They would never be that stupid.
There's no way this is why they did it.
Man, that's some 2020s logic right there.
Yeah. Well, I just watched...
Too stupid. It's impossible.
Not this build again. Jesus Christ. I'm trying the other faction in Stormgate, and apparently people are doing this air build that's rather strong. Man, people are silly. I like that there are lots of silly people, though. It makes me feel less alone.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a big, confusing world. It has a lot of moving parts. People are not sufficiently educated on how to navigate it. No surprise that you end up with a lot of shenanigans. Pretty much inevitable. It's surprising it's not worse, really. It really should be worse, just given how chaotic the world is and how complicated it is. You know, mankind has basically built a massively complex construct. You know, modern society and all of its physical infrastructure, and all of its soft norms, all of its invisible institutions that govern it, all of it is a complex machine. And we're just dumping monkeys into it and hoping for the best. That's basically what we're doing when we're just throwing people into that mess and hoping that they can utilize it to full effect and continue civilization. It's only going to get harder because society only ever gets more complex. And the human mind, meanwhile, only can get, can only process so much information. We can only do so much. And we're really not preparing people well for how to do that, how to navigate that machinery of modern society. We really should be doing better. But that will require being proactive, and people really hate being proactive.
Well, also, change is something that's inherently not really the incentive for whoever currently has power. It's like, you have power, why would you make situations benefit other people than yourself? Like that.
Yeah.
Ask to get people to do selfless stuff it's a pretty big ask if you're thinking about a limited lifespan creature that wants to maximize its own situation. And one of the things that isn't really understood or at least internalized for humans is the similarity between other humans, like the differences between two ethnicities of people. Really, you're still basically the same organism. If you think about all the different moving parts in our genetic code and stuff, like we sometimes overemphasize the differences and we lose sight of the fact that, okay, you were raised Muslim, I was raised Christian, whatever. That wasn't a choice that we made per se. So for us to kill each other over a choice that was someone else's is pretty wild. We don't really need to do that technically.
Oh yeah. Such is human nature.
Yep. We're slowly getting better. Very slowly.
Incrementally, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't, for tonight's discussion, it wasn't too hard to be playing this game while doing so. I don't have as much knowledge about what exactly I'm supposed to do in this game, but I played the other faction, so I don't really have a high MMR with it, so I didn't really face super strong opponents, which allowed me to focus more on the conversation. But I've gotten a lot of sweaty Age of Empires pros and stuff at my main faction MMR. It's kind of cool to see different players from different RTS communities coming together to try this game. I have played a very slight amount of Age of Empires 2, but not very much at all.
Yeah, I'm not big on... I haven't played much Age of Empires, so I can't comment too much on that. I guess it doesn't surprise me that a lot of Age of Empires players are coming over. That's still a pretty robust community, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there I guess there's no, timeline for the development for Stormgate. Or if there is, I guess you wouldn't be able to talk about it. But there's no release date that's been announced, correct?
They do not have an official release date yet. I think they have the targeted quarter maybe, but they don't really have a firmly set date. And for a lot of these games, same thing with the different expansions of StarCraft, the game will be pretty much done, but in multiplayer beta where people are still testing it and you're kind of waiting on the campaigns to be launched. So they have planned for both multiplayer, campaigns, and co-op. So I don't know if you enjoy co-op StarCraft 2 or whatever, but their co-op mode in this is 3v3 or 3vAI, and it feels very similar to StarCraft 2 co-op, but with Warcraft 3 map objectives.
Huh. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think they want to have a lot of the same sort of map editing tools and stuff. They've really wanted to emphasize the community-driven aspect of how a lot of cool game modes and stuff are made, which is brilliant. You're getting the community to do the work for you. Why would you not do that?
Yeah.
But I know the StarCraft map editor is pretty jacked. I would guess you could make some pretty cool stuff in this if they flesh that out.
I actually dicked around with the StarCraft editor a lot back in 2018.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's cool, but there's some functionality I wish they would add to it. There's some things that you want to do, but you can't quite do.
Like what?
Well, it's not as easy as it should be to kind of mix and match stuff. There are art assets in the game, and sometimes you want to make a structure or a unit in the editor just by attaching them to some of the hard points. Hard points isn't the right, but attaching them to each other as hard points to make something new. And that actually can be a little difficult, especially if you just want to make something new and then copy paste that and use it again on another map or something like that. Certainly, if you want to do something that's animated, that can be very difficult too, for much the same reason. Mm-hmm. So it could use a little more functionality in that regard. If you only want to use the art assets as they are, it's no big deal. Like as you say, it's very flexible and you can do a lot with it. But I wasn't quite trying to do that. I was trying to do something different and a little bit hamstrung by some of the restrictions. We didn't get any questions, did we?
Might have gotten a couple of questions. I think I saw
we did.
Okay. Last long one.
Yeah, I see them.
Yeah, we can get them for next time probably. Chat. We do this every Sunday, pretty much every Sunday around 6 p.m. Pacific time when we start, and we go for about 3 hours. So if you like the world discussions, we're on there, and then these all get posted to YouTube as well. And if we said anything wrong, stupid, or biased, give us a scathing review in the YouTube comments, and we can fix it up. Appreciate you.
Yeah, we always appreciate feedback.
Mm-hmm. Feedback, first-hand accounts, funny stories. We're about it. Did you want to look at flags? Because my viewership when I play this game is actually a lot of new people. I'm somewhat curious to see if anything stands out.
One from Vietnam. Don't see Vietnam too much. It's always cool to see. Mm-hmm. One from Ukraine. One Japan. I don't know why I'm always surprised to see Japan in here, but I am. So hopefully our Ukrainian, Vietnamese, and Japanese viewers are doing well. Thank you for listening. I guess you're not necessarily from those countries. You may just be an expat working there. We get a few of those too. And it's always cool to see Brazil. Mm-hmm. Actually, I have a question for the Brazilian viewer. I'm assuming that they're from Brazil and not just somebody in Brazil, but what are your thoughts on the Lula da Silva government? How have they been doing? How's he been doing, rather? I haven't heard much about him since he's been in office. He's been kind of quiet. So he hasn't been doing too much with the United States, it seems. So always appreciate the opinions and perspectives of people on the ground in the countries we talk about. And Brazil doesn't come up in the news too much, so opinions about them are especially welcome. And other than that, it's pretty much the usual suspects. Being quiet is generally a good thing, Dagnov. Generally, it's a good thing. Generally, that means you're not doing something so explicitly stupid that the BBC thinks it's worth reporting on. But sometimes it just means you're in a part of the world that just doesn't get much attention in general. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's if you live in South America or sub-Saharan Africa, that's frequently the case. International news agencies don't pay much attention to those places because they're not as integrated into the global economy. And they generally don't have as much violence going on that is impactful to people living in places like Europe, North America, or East Asia. Actually, I can ask you, Neuro, when was the last time you saw any news involving South America?
Yeah, I think the Brazil election. But aside from that, not really too much.
Yeah. Doesn't come up much over here. Mm-hmm. Pretty rare.
The amazing thing, though, is that there's tons of stuff going on everywhere all the time. It's just not of it as equally served to us. That's one of the things that makes the Israel-Palestine conflict so interesting, is that it is being heavily served to us, in the U.S. at least. I don't know about the countries that you live in, chat, but yeah, there are a lot of other conflicts happening as well that we sometimes talk about on here that don't really get nearly as much screen time or news media time in our countries, but that doesn't make them any less valid. It just means that they're not as well reported on, at least in our language and in our information lanes. True. Well, I appreciate you coming on as always, and chat, you are amazing. Thank you for not getting into a fight, even though we said the words Israel and Palestine. I know it's hard. It is very hard.
Very challenging.
And thank you, Fuzzy Cord, for passing along some questions. We can get to those on the next episode of Will Discussion with Agent Smith. And I give you your regular walking challenge.
Oh, shit. Yeah, I did do that last time. I did do that.
Good.
So
and 10 push-ups.
Challenge again. And 10 push. The push-ups really get me.
Good.
Even if you're out of shape, you can always walk. But those push-ups, man, if you haven't been doing them, they can really do a number on you.
Mm-hmm. Turn gravity aside. Cool. Did you watch the Super Bowl?
No, I did not. Who won?
I think the Chiefs won.
Chiefs won. Okay. That's good for Kansas City.
Yeah.
I know very little about Kansas City. I don't know how many people not from the United States we have listening right now. Most of you probably do not give a singular flying fuck about cities in the United States. But for those of you interested, even in the United States, Kansas City does not have much of an identity. It's not a city many of us think about very often. So the fact that their football team has won, 2 Super Bowls in a row now? Is that right? Yeah, that's about the most any of us have heard about Kansas City in a very long time.
Just double checking this. Chiefs versus 49ers today. Yeah, you're correct. It's their second consecutive win.
Yeah. So that's great for Kansas City. It gives them something to be excited about. I don't know that they have anything else to be excited about. Maybe they do. Nobody really knows unless they live in Kansas City.
Mm. Well, awesome. I think I should probably be free for next weekend, but always good having you on. I'll try to get a little bit more reading done in American Nations. My next chapter is the 6 Wars of Liberation, so it's basically the different fights that broke out during the American Revolution. It wasn't like one big cohesive battle. It's like the British are kind of trying to lay the hammer down for the bad behavior of the American colonists, and different people are fighting back in different ways. But yeah, we didn't really study it in depth when I was in middle school and high school and college and stuff, so excited to read about that.
I'm sorry, somebody in chat is saying they're reasonably sure it's in the state of Kansas. It's actually not.
Yeah,
Kansas City is not in Kansas. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
America is a very confusing place.
Yep. Well, cool.
Well,
you take care of yourself. Yeah.
Always a pleasure. Much appreciated.
Take care of yourself, and we will see you on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yes, sir. Thanks again. Talk to you next time.
GG.